January 6 videos, you can see that the Blacks for Trump were treated well by the other Trumpers that were there, that were supposed to all be white supremacists. I did a video on that debunking everything's going to be all white take.
All right. I think my cat claws caused me to lose my connection for a second. So let's rewind a second. I guess we're on the second video of this live stream. Hopefully people will come back. I don't know. I don't know if y'all saw a break in it or not, but it ended my live stream for me on YouTube. So my cats are being a pain in the neck. I don't know if it's the cats or if it's cocks. Either way, it's a C word. That's a problem.
Again, that these people, when seeking allies to meet out their goals, happened to find that they had an awful lot in common with the Ku Klux Klan. So once again, looking at this critically, I've never seen any evidence that MAGA was exclusionary to people of other races. Like the Blacks for Trump group is an excellent example of that. When you watch January 6 videos, you can see that the Blacks for Trump were treated well by the other Trumpers that were there, that were supposed to all be white supremacists. I did a video on that debunking everything's going to be all white take on January 6, where they whitewash the whole event. They'd like to whitewash the entire Trump movement.
Wait, I mean, you don't support Trump, but you don't think they whitewash January 6th? What? I mean...
But again, Klingons are not Trumpers. Klingons are black nationalists. How do I come to that conclusion? Well, as I already proved, they're all about remain black and Klingon.
Okay, you've done a better job, I think, of saying that there's a much closer argument to be made that perhaps the Klingon extremists from Star Trek Discovery have similarities with black nationalists. That's fine. I mean, there's enough similarities there where I'm fine with you making that point, although I think there are some differences there that, explain the fact that, the difference between the two. I think there are some differences where it's not a perfect explanation, but analogies don't have to be perfect to be correct, so fine. But, important thing here is that you still haven't said why that is CRT. That's my ultimate point.
Klingons are about remain Klingon. Thanks for listening. Thanks again for tuning in, everybody.
All right, so let's shut that down for a second, and we're going to probably go to the one more video, because I did want to go to one more video, but we are going to pop over to V-Radio's live stream just to see.
Thanks again for tuning in, everybody.
All right, so let's shut that down for a second. Okay. So we're going to probably go to the one more video, because I did want to go. Let's pause that. Yeah, okay, good. So they did stay with it, I suppose, and they're still, I guess, viewing it again. So let's see. Gabriel, he's always working along Marxist definitions, PPUXR, CRT, cultural appropriation, rape culture, it's all Marxist power struggle. BS, I'm calling him Marxist. I mean, fine, you can call me what you want, but it doesn't necessarily make it true or not. But yeah, no, it's not over. I don't know if it's my cats that caused the problem or if it was Cox Communications that caused the problem, but unfortunately there was a glitch in the Matrix that caused me to... and I love the people who are like responding, Dan, no one knows what you're talking about. Dan is overdue for a nap. I mean, I'm probably going to go to sleep at some point soon, but I like how all these points are responding to me in V-Radio's chat as if I can see them. Just keep talking, Dan. 525,600 minutes. I should 525,600 minutes. Sorry. You have to have you deal with my whatchamacallit, with my bad singing. But anyway, so I just wanted to make sure that people did see that I was back with the next stream, I suppose. Let's see. So let's go back to his videos. There was one more that I wanted to play. Let's see if I can find it. Science says SJW strategies for activism cause hatred and bigotry. Oh, this one's 30 minutes.
So back in 2017,
through,
the left-leaning website Quartz had published this article. The data are in. Young people are increasingly less racist than old people.
And that's one of the things that I have problems with. Is it data is or data are? I don't know. Maybe data are is correct, but it just sounds weird. Anyway, let's continue.
They go on to quote some statistics of various polls that were used to determine that racism was on a serious decline from the 1960s. In the 1960s, almost half of white respondents in the U.S. suggested that they would move if a black family moved in next door, but the proportion of Americans reporting to the World Values Survey that they were uncomfortable living next to someone of a different race fell from 8% in the 1980s to 6% today. Again, in 1958, only 4% of Americans approved of interracial marriage, according to the Gallup polling. Support only crossed the 50% threshold in 1997. It has now reached 87%. Although people can lie to surveyors about their beliefs, the polling matches up with the behavioral change. In 1980, less than 7% of marriages were between spouses of different races or an ethnicity in the United States. That climbed to 15% by 2010. There were 6,336 racially or ethnically motivated hate crimes reported by the FBI in 1994. That dropped to 3,310 in 2015.
It's his job to scroll because
however, moving ahead to 2021, hate crimes reached the highest level in more than a decade. There were 7,759.
Okay, let's just. This probably should have fit into my Math is Hard video. Oh, my head hurts from that. Oh my God. This would probably fit into my Math is Hard video. Because, okay, there's a difference between rates and number. Again, there's a difference between rates of things happening and numbers of things happening. Yes, you could take the same set of data and say, and like over smoking, and say smoking has increased and smoking has decreased in the same time period, because it's possible you could have a situation where a lower percentage of the American public are smoking, but a higher number of Americans are smoking, or more cigarettes are being sold, despite the fact that maybe less cigarettes are being sold per capita. So you can take data and interpret it different ways. So it's very possible that, you know, and we're going to make this point here in the video, because again, I have not watched any of this video. As other videos, I've seen bits and pieces. I haven't watched any of this video. But here's the thing, is that, yeah, you could have a percentage of Americans who support racial equality, who don't disagree with interracial marriage, and so the percentage of Americans who are overly racist could be decreasing over time, and that's a true statement. Meanwhile, the percentage of people, like if you have 100,000 people and 50% of people are racist, then you have like 1 million people and 25% of the people are racist. You've still quintupled the amount of racists in the country as a number factor, even if they're a smaller proportion of society. And so you might have more physical people who are racist, even though they make up less of a percentage of society, so they could still do more crimes. And maybe those people, maybe they feel more marginalized and upset because of the fact that they're dwindling in numbers, so that might make them more angry. That might make them more upset and more likely to lash out and do things like shoot up Buffalo, someplace in Buffalo, shoot up a store in Buffalo, or something, or do other hate crimes, go to the church like Dylan Roof did or whatever. So, but is V Radio really going to be making the argument that it's the woke culture that's causing this hatred, or is it just the fact that these people are feeling more and more marginalized because they're less and less, that they now have to lash out more to be able to protect what they feel needs to be protected? We're going to continue with that, but again, like this is something that I talked about a little bit on my show yesterday. At this point, it's still yesterday, for at least another 17 minutes. That like the math problems here is like, yeah, you could have you could have a higher percentage of people believing and not being racist while still having more racists in this country, and those racists could still be more virulent or have more vitriol or be more toxic. You could have more toxic racists, like maybe the amount of toxic racists that you have might be growing as a percentage, even if the number of overall racists are shrinking. Let's continue.
reported hate crimes in the U.S. last year, the most in 12 years, the FBI reported this week. But some experts and advocacy groups say the true number is probably even higher. The number of recorded bias incidents reported by the FBI was the highest since 2008, when 7,783 hate crimes were reported to the agency, federal data shows. The spike in 2020 follows a recent upward trend in bias incidents, and it was a 6% increase over 2019.
Why would there be a spike in hate crimes in 2020? Why, over those 4 years, would there be a spike in hate crimes? Are we putting the cart before the horse? Are we blaming wokeness or social justice strategies for this increase? Or is there something else that could be to blame? Well, let's continue and see. But it's important questions to ask.
So, what caused the sudden surge of racism? Now, some people, of course, like to suggest that somehow Trump getting elected on its own is what did that. But
I have suggested that, sure.
I've never really understood that theory.
Well, let's explain that theory then. If you don't understand it, let's explain it. In Donald Trump, and we talked about this in the last video, in Donald Trump, you had somebody who ran on a platform of bigotry and xenophobia and racism. He ran on a total, complete shutdown of Muslims entering this country. He said he was going to shut down. Mexico was sending us murderers and rapists, some of whom were good people, or what have you. You had Charlottesville, where he was making excuses for, trying to hedge both sides and be like, you had good people on both sides. No, you didn't have good people on both sides, because if you're marching in a parade with Nazis and white supremacists, if you're marching right next to somebody who's shouting, the Jews will not replace us, and you didn't then hear that and leave that march, you're marching with them. You're marching with Nazis. I see no moral difference between a Nazi and you. So yeah, there are no good people on the side of the Nazis on Charlottesville. Period. And a story. You're unlikely to change my mind on that. Although, hey, maybe you could. I don't know. I'm not totally unopen to the idea that maybe you could give me a great argument that would change my mind. But you're unlikely to change my mind on that, because of the fact that you're marching with Nazis. I tend to, take extreme stances against people who march with Nazis. You're literally shouting blood and soil. Nazi propaganda. It's ridiculous. I haven't seen anybody chat in the chat room in a few seconds. Is everybody still here? Or, I'm not seeing a lot of chat. I'm seeing that I have an excellent condition, but I'm not seeing the chat. I'm seeing it on my phone, but I'm not seeing it in the chat room. So there we go. Okay, so I'm gonna have to look at my phone to see the chats and not my screen, because for some reason my screen isn't showing me the chat. Weird. Or let's just live chat. We got a live chat? I don't know. There we are. Maybe it's because I'm in live chat. That's better. There you go. Now I have the better chat on my. There you go. Okay. Things are fixed. So yes, but Donald Trump, when he campaigned, and as Kimchi said, I think it was Kimchi, Donald Trump, when he ran, he emboldened the racists, he emboldened the white supremacists, he emboldened the bigotry, he emboldened the people who held those beliefs, because they said, look, finally, we have a president who sides with us. Donald Trump campaigned on America First. You should do a video, V-Radio, on the history of America First. Maybe I'll do a video on it. The history of America First is a history of Nazism, of American Nazism, American white supremacy, American bigotry, and Donald Trump embraced that whole America First idea. And now, I just believe that we should put America first and nobody else. No, America First has clear Nazi background. American Nazis supported America First, and he's the greatest con men in the world know their audience, and they know how to say things that give you plausible deniability. America's First is harmless. I'm just saying you should love America. No, the people who he's speaking to know what he's saying when he says that. He's speaking in code. So if you don't understand how Donald Trump played up and endorsed and enforced and encouraged and riled up those white supremacist, white nationalist, Nazi folks living in this country, then you weren't paying attention.
Nor have I been able to get anybody to give me any actual statistics to correlate how Trump's election somehow led to an increase in racism.
Not an increase in racism, but an increase in hate crimes, because we're talking about the 2021 hate crimes reached the highest level in more than a decade. Wonder why. Let's see if I can pull that up. Hate crimes United States per year. Come on. Cats. Stop being annoying. You're probably knocking on my internet again. I think this is my computer. I don't think this is the internet. I think this is my computer because it's being very slow. Like, it's not responding to me. I probably should have restarted my computer beforehand. Let's see. Wes Webb, I think Dan likes me. I mean, Wes, you've been fine. Maybe you were a little drunk earlier, maybe. I don't know. You still haven't made it rain. FBI hate crime statistics, justice.gov. So we want per year. Is there per year? Where's per year? That's just single. Statista, U.S. hate crimes new high. Let's see. Fine. Let's see. Let's go here. So hate crimes dropped from 07 to 08. 09. We can bring this over here, I suppose. So dipped in 14 and then 16 and then went up in 17, 18, 19, and went up even more in 20. So, I mean, here's where Donald Trump took office, right here. I mean, that's a very 30,000 point of view, but I mean, it's there. Let's see. Okay, if you keep playing the video, I'll show the hate crime statistics. Well, I mean, I gotta sit here and wonder.
After doing some reading of scientific papers on the topic and speaking to competent racial activists like Daryl Davis, I have a different explanation.
What makes one a competent racial activist? Can you let me know in the chat, V-Radio? What makes one a competent racial activist?
Let's have a look at what happens to the human mind when someone's specific group identity is attacked. Even if you think you are trying to attack them to bring them around to your way of thinking, it actually has the opposite effect. This is not a matter of opinion. This is scientifically proven.
Okay, so it's scientifically proven that shaming people doesn't work in making people stop their behavior. I mean, I think shaming people helps stop some people. I mean, some people can't be shamed. Sometimes shaming people will cause bad people to behave worse. Maybe it will convince them to act worse. Maybe. But is that the fault of the people who are doing the shaming, or is that the fault of the people who are like the Nazis? Like, if you're going to commit a hate crime and something mean that a social justice warrior said to you makes you commit a hate crime, makes you want to go out and commit a hate crime more, I should say. Is that really the fault of the SJW? Are we really telling people that social justice warriors shouldn't be mean to racists because racists don't like it and they're fragile snowflakes and it's going to make them, want to attack more marginalized folks? Or should we put the blame where it is, on the people performing the hate crimes?
If you engage in hatred, you will beget hatred. Now, a lot of the...
But but there's also the tolerance paradox, where in order to be truly tolerant, you have to be intolerant of intolerance. And it might seem like it's a paradox, because how can you be intolerant? How can you be tolerant if you're intolerant of somebody? But you have to be intolerant of intolerance in order to be tolerant. It's the other side of that argument.
The studies that were conducted about this phenomenon, ironically, were conducted by left-leaning scientists who usually were trying to find explanations for how racism took root in the right. But everything that they discovered would equally apply to people on the left. Authoritarianism is not unique to the right or to the left, and it can be a response to people feeling insecure. Let's read this excerpt from the article. Among the most important guides in this inquiry is the political scientist Karen Stenner. In 2005, Stenner published a book called The Authoritarian Dynamic, an academic work full of graphs, descriptions of regression analysis, and discussions of scholarly disputes over the nature of authoritarianism. It therefore had not had a wide readership. Her core finding is that authoritarianism is not a stable personality trait. It is rather a psychological predisposition to become intolerant when the person receives a certain kind of threat. It's as though some people have a button on their foreheads, and when the button is pushed, they suddenly become intensely focused on defending their in-group, kicking out foreigners and nonconformists, and stamping out dissent within the group. At those times, they are more attracted to strongmen and the use of force. At other times, when they perceive no such threat, they are not unusually intolerant. So the key is to understand what pushes that button.
Okay, so again, it seems to me, maybe I'm wrong, and I'll say if I'm wrong if I am, it seems to me that the argument here is that if somebody who is one of these types of folks starts supporting authoritarianism and supports the strong man, wants to kick out foreigners, wants to kick out nonconformists, wants to stamp out dissent, because that button was pushed, the fault is on the person who pushed the button than on the person that responded to the button being pushed in that negative way? I can't agree with that. Now, science might say that this is what happens, but again, science saying that this happens isn't saying, it's still not say, it still wouldn't be saying that it's not the person's fault for supporting the authoritarian, for supporting the straw man, for supporting the nonconformist. It's still just saying they might act that way because they have that button push. It doesn't necessarily put the blame on the button pusher.
Now, looking at this, I'm sure many leftists immediately are saying, well, yes, the right is inclined to fascism. And meanwhile, people on the right, who believe that communism and authoritarianism are not in any way separate, will say, well, yes, the left is inclined towards communism. What both sides don't recognize is that...
The problem with communism is that communism works in communes, like small little things like the kibbutzes in Israel, where you have a group of people by choice working together to reach a common goal, but the communes in Israel, despite the fact that they share the products of their work and work together to help everybody achieve a common goal, they still sell their goods on a market. They still sell their goods, in a capitalist society. Communism doesn't work as a whole. Communism as a large country, in a country level, is going to end up in authoritarianism because of the fact that it's not a commune. So you have to have somebody who's going to be the head people and have that head power, and then power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So, as
tribalism itself can cause an authoritarian reaction in
Lucifer's like, and go to the large scale. I went to the large scale. I was ahead of you.
Society, because people, feeling insecure, will turn to authoritarians to protect them. This quote in particular stuck out to me because I've experienced this phenomenon. It's as though some people have a button on their foreheads, and when the button is pushed, they suddenly become intensely focused on defending their in-group.
Now, did you experience this phenomenon because you have the button, or because you saw somebody else pushing somebody else's button?
It occurred to me one day that I had an epiphany. That epiphany was that all of the closest to racist thoughts I have ever had generally came from interacting with racial activists. Not even...
That's a little bit telling of on yourself. Like, racial activists cause you to have thoughts that were racist, that were close to racist. I don't even know what that means. Like, I've never had somebody, a singular black person, come up to me and do something and talk to me in a negative way to make me think, oh, all of them.
Getting beat up by black kids who hated white kids in the ghetto.
Aaron West, my button is not on my forehead. Touche. Well played.
Ever made me consider any kind of racist thinking. But interacting with racial activists would occasionally cause me to have twinges of those thoughts. The same would be said for every bordering on sexist thought I've ever had, coming from interacting with feminists, every bordering on transphobic thought I've ever had, coming with from interacting with trans activists. So, if they're the activists, and they're supposed to be convincing us that we shouldn't hate certain groups, why do they have that effect on people? I remember discussing with a local Black Lives Matter activist my conversation with Daryl Davis, and specifically how Daryl would essentially rescue white people who had been converted into the cult of racism by humanizing himself to them and just demonstrating that racism is absurd by showing that he, as a black man, was human and even relatable. And the reply that I got from the Black Lives Matter activist was that I don't want to convince people. I want them to be afraid. Anybody who's ever studied the psychology involving racism knows that racism literally is caused by fear.
And make my point without
an interesting note, when Daryl Davis went to Baltimore to interact with Black Lives Matter, the conversation went extremely poorly.
So we're going to refresh this video and try and see if I can get my pause and unpause button back.
Was that I don't.
There we go. Now there's my button back. All right, so we're going to go back in time a second. Be like Cher. If I could turn back time.
Groups. Why do they have that effect on people?
Oh, I didn't go back far enough.
With trans activists. So, if they're the activists, and they're supposed to be convincing us that we shouldn't hate certain groups, why do they have that effect on people?
Again, like, honestly, I'm going to have to say that if what they're saying is causing you to have negative feelings about the groups as a whole that they're being activists for, that's not a negative. That's not saying what you think it's saying. That's not the fault of them. That's the fault of you. Now, if they say something that you find insulting, for example, and if you think that individual, if you have a negative thought about that individual because that individual said something that you disagree with, I mean, fine. That's not that there are activists, there are people who are feminists who I've had arguments with, who I think maybe jump the shark. Something I've referred to things as jump the shark activism, where you go a little too far, or way too far. There is, I've talked about jump the shark activism long time ago on the show. I probably should bring that back. I haven't really talked about jump the shark activism in a while. I've kind of replaced jump the shark activism with the overly woke folks, maybe, even though jump the shark activism can be on both sides, where the overly woke is only for the people who are woke. But even that, when somebody has done jump the shark activism and has gone that cuckoo area of activism, it still hasn't made me be like, oh, well, I just hate all women then. Or, oh, wait, that person is trans and they're making an argument in support of trans folk that is a jump the shark argument that I don't know, I can't think of one specifically. I'm just not going to hate. I'm just going to be a transphobe now, or I'm close to being a transphobe. No, that has literally never happened to me. I've literally never had the circumstance where an individual said something and it made me be like, well, I'm going to hate their entire group then. Let's see. V-Radio says, science shows that there is a psychological phenomenon that you attack in a group, that person will respond by attacking yours. That's a point. Oh, but you're saying, they were attacking, they said something that made you mad and made you think transphobic, racist, and or sexist, or almost transphobic, almost racist, almost sexist things. So if you want to be a terrible activist against no one, then go on jumping down a throat. It doesn't work. But again, besides some other people have said in the chat, sometimes shaming people does work. But I mean, the idea here that you're proposing is that I have to treat these people with kid gloves. I have to somehow be nice to the Nazis. You know, is that what I mean, to me, that's what you're saying. Like, I see people being Nazis. I have to be nice to the Nazis in order to make them no longer be Nazis. I don't know. I mean, again, we saw later on in the next part of the video, you do talk about the individual, who is an impressive individual, I'll admit. And we'll get to that in a second. But the idea that a marginalized group has to be nice to their oppressors in order to get gains is kind of like what the complaint in that piece in the last video you were talking about was saying, was that, you know, if you need to act the certain right way and just fit in with your oppressors, and then you'll be okay as long as you don't hurt the feelings of your oppressors too much. If you hurt your oppressors' feelings too much, then, well, you know, then it's your fault because you hurt their feelings. No, they're oppressors. It's not the fault of the oppressed. It's not the responsibility of the oppressed to mind the feelings of the oppressors. It's the responsibility of the oppressors to not oppress. And it's not the responsibility. Oh, you're not going to convince anybody. Well, there are some people I'm raised Jewish, so I don't necessarily believe in this totally, but there's this idea, I guess, in Christianity where sometimes some people's hearts are so hardened that they can't move anywhere. So if these people's hearts are so hardened, I'm never going to move them with niceness. They're just going to view niceness as weakness. So you have to stand up to the bullies. If you don't stand up to bullies, they continue to bully. So maybe there's some mythical people. Maybe of those people that are the bullies, or the people who are predisposed to bullying, maybe some of those people might be like, oh, well, this Jew is nice to me. You know, this Jewish person gave me a candy bar once, so therefore I'm not gonna hate Jews anymore because one Jew was nice to me. I'm gonna change my worldview. Does this person exist? Maybe. But what are the odds? It's like the whole thing that I talked about earlier with Muhammad Ali. And he's sitting there and saying, there's a bunch of snakes coming at you. You know, you're basically saying that Muhammad Ali should just let all the poisonous snakes come in. And if he slams the door on the snakes, it's just going to make the snakes more snaky, more likely to bite him because he slammed the door in their face. Where if he only let those snakes in the room, maybe some of those snakes would have behaved. Whatever.
I remember discussing with a local Black Lives Matter activist my conversation with Daryl Davis, and specifically how Daryl would essentially rescue white people who had been converted into the cult of racism by humanizing himself to them and just demonstrating that racism is absurd by showing that he, as a black man, was human and even relatable. And the reply that I got from the Black Lives Matter activist was that I don't want to convince people. I want them to be afraid. Anybody who's ever studied the psychology involved...
I would like to know... Well, I do think that Daryl Davis does some amazing things. This is not the first time I've heard of Daryl Davis. I'm impressed that he's willing to take that risk to go chat with a bunch of people who basically want him dead, and maybe convince some of them to no longer want him dead, and maybe even convince some of them to reject the ingrained racism that exists in their hearts and their souls and their minds, because he was able to make a good enough argument that he was a person and that they, as other people, should treat him like people. That's great that he's able to do that. I wonder what the percentage, what his success rate is. Like, how is his success? Let's see, what percent of people did Daryl Davis convince? I don't know if that's going to come up with anything. Okay, so June 26, 2021, there's an article on the New York Times. I'm sure I'm not going to see much of it because of the fact that, New York Times often has a paywall. And he was 63. He is this unusual calling. He hangs out with Ku Klux members, neo-Nazis, and chips away at their racism. So, 10-year-old brain could not have processed the idea of the harm that has happened to me. And according to this article, he's convinced some 200 white supremacists to leave the Klan and other extremist groups. What that does is what the article doesn't say. How many people has Daryl Davis spoken to? How many racists has Daryl Davis spoken to? Let's see if that's something that's available. It is not coming up specifically as something that is a statistic that's available. It's a V Radio. National leaders of KKK leave the organization after he befriends them. But does that mean do the rest of them follow? Do the rest of the people follow, or are the rest of the people like, that person's a race traitor because he's now friends with Daryl Davis and not friends with I mean, look, I'm impressed that he was able to convince 200 Klansmen, neo-Nazis, and other bigots to somehow leave their racism behind and overcome the brainwashing that somehow he is a terrible person because he is a black man. I'm very impressed that he's able to do that to 200 people. What I'm asking is, how many people did he talk to? Has he talked to 2,000? Has he talked to 20,000? I mean, has he talked to 250? I mean, if he talked to 250 and made 200 of them change their minds, that's amazing. That's pretty good. If he talked to 2,000 and convinced 200, that's 10%. That's not as good. I mean, it's still impressive that he got to 200, but most of them still are so hardened that they can't be convinced the other way. So, look up the statistics on how many people cease to be racist because of riots, burning lit. That's a disingenuous comment because, again, we're talking about who the responsibility is on stopping racism. I mean, it's possible. Like, how many people were scared away from doing a racist act because they were scared of the consequences that might happen to them? Sure, many people were thought to themselves, I'm not going to do something racist. I'm not going to attack these people because I'm going to be punished if I do so. So therefore, I'm not going to do it. That's how our system of justice sometimes works. That's part of our system of justice, is we have incentives to do right, but we also have disincentives from doing wrong. So if you're going to do something bad, you're going to get punished for it. So what happens when Donald Trump gets elected? Donald Trump gets elected. Now these people are like, the president of my country believes in me and believes what I'm saying and is calling me out and calling me to duty. So therefore, I'm less likely to be punished for it. So therefore, I'm going to be more likely to go commit these crimes. Let's continue.
Following racism knows that racism literally is caused by fear. An interesting note, when Daryl Davis went to Baltimore to interact with Black Lives Matter, the conversation went extremely poorly, and they threatened him never to return. In this article written by Bart Bonakowski, an associate professor of sociology at Harvard, Ethno-Nationalist Populism and the Mobilization of Collective Resentment, scholarly and journalistic accounts of the recent successes of radical right politics in Europe and the United States, including the Brexit referendum and the Trump campaign, tend to conflate three phenomena: populism, ethno-nationalism, and authoritarianism. While all three are important elements of the radical right, they are neither coterminous nor limited to the right. In other words, yes, in fact, people on the left can get caught up in this kind of crap just as well. The resulting lack of analytical clarity has entered accounts of the causes and consequences of ethno-nationalist populism. So, when they talk about ethno-nationalist populism and how that can also come about, this is the black nationalist movements that, for example, critical race theory documents suggest were right, that somehow Malcolm X was right and Martin Luther King was wrong. Political and media discourse has channeled such threats into resentments towards elites, immigrants, and ethnic, racial, and religious minorities, thereby activating previously latent attitudes and lending legitimacy to radical political campaigns that promise to return power and status to the aggrieved supporters. This can happen to black people, white people, Hispanic people, anybody. If you can convince people that...
Yeah, it can happen to anybody, sure. But in 2016, it happened to the people who were supporting Donald Trump.
They're the aggrieved and promise to bring power back to you, to the people who are aggrieved. You can gain a lot of power. This is how a lot of dangerous people, whether it's Mao, Stalin, Hitler, have come to power over the years, is essentially through othering, creating a situation where you tell them, you guys are all victims, and the people that are the problem are this other group of people, and if you just follow me, we'll deal with them. Not only does this form of politics...
But there's a difference between like Nazis saying, if you just follow me, we'll get rid of the problem, i.e. the Jews, and people saying, if you just follow me, we'll get rid of all the Nazis. Like, there is a difference there. There's a big moral difference there.
Threaten democratic institutions and intergroup relations, but it also has the potential to alter the contours of mainstream public discourse, thereby creating the conditions of possibility for future success of populist, nationalist, and authoritarian politics. Now notice, he didn't just say white nationalists. This kind of thinking can literally infect the minds of anybody. And it's brought about by creating a circumstance of fear. You make people afraid that their group is a threat. And then it's really easy at that point, because it activates primitive parts of our minds that are related to tribalism, to rise up and defend one's tribe.
All right, so the people who are going around saying "make racists afraid again" are somehow to blame for racists being racist.
In this study called Experiments in Intergroup Discrimination, they asked the question, can discrimination be traced to some such origin as social conflict or a history of hostility? Not necessarily. Apparently, the mere fact of division into groups is enough to trigger discriminatory behavior. They conducted a series of experiments where they created...
And I think the picture of the individual who is on the cover of this video is somebody who's done just that, splitting people into groups like brown hair versus blonde hair, blue eyes, and brown
created
eyes.
Groups, and basically just artificially created groups within the people that they were doing the experiment with, and notice this behavior. This same effect has been recreated in a more famous classroom study that we'll be going over here shortly. But it's important to remember that,
yes, it's a classroom study. I'm sure it's Jane Elliot that's going to be talked about right now.
That just the act of dividing people into groups will cause discriminatory behavior. And as I demonstrated earlier, that can lead to...
So the people who... So, are you saying, the people who are like, oh, white people like unseasoned food and put raisins in potato salads, that's going to make somebody be racist? Or if they talk about, white nationalists and white supremacy and white privilege, is that going to... Is that... I know people that get very angry over the fact that you mentioned white privilege when that's not an... Stating that somebody has white privilege isn't an attack against them. It's a statement of fact that it's not a condemnation against an individual. Only condemnation comes when people don't work to fight against the privileges that they might have to try and make things more equitable.
Other effects like bigotry, xenophobia, etc. And this is not just limited to race. If you spend a whole bunch of time dividing people up by their gender, by their sexual identity, by their sexual preference, whatever, and just making that the core of all human interaction, then you're literally creating the circumstances for social phenomenon like racism, bigotry, sexism, etc. to take hold. You're creating it by making people hyper-aware of an idea that supposedly we're all different instead of all being the same. Tribalism happens when you believe that you're part of one tribe.
Well, the problem is that the people who are getting angry about that, because we're not all the same, because we're not all treated the same. So that's one of the things the CRT tries to look at is why we're not being all treated the same, why there's disparities and marginalization that goes place of certain groups in this country based on race. But we've somehow villainized that thought into examining the reasons why as that's somehow a negative, because the people who want whiteness to be in control and who believe in like white replacement theory don't want to address that, because they don't want to fix that. Because if you fix that, then guess what happens? They lose their power.
And then somebody else is part of a different tribe. Let's take a look at that experiment I mentioned earlier. So this social experiment was conducted in the 1960s by a woman named Jane Elliot. She since went on to kind of be really anti-white and woke in that regard. But the experiment was meant to teach children about how judging people solely by the basis of superficial characteristics is wrong. And it's not just that it's immoral, it doesn't make any sense. You can't hold an individual accountable for things done by people who just look like them.
Jane Elliot is not anti-white because of what she does. Jane Elliot uses her arguments. Oh, and of course I just lost this again. Jane Elliot has used her platform to be able to show people why racism is stupid, because she's done so by showing white kids
aware of an idea
might initially have
that supposedly we're all different,
racist beliefs, who might have been raised to believe those white racist beliefs, that white people are superior, that black people are terrible, and such, that black people are inferior, that somehow that she's trying to make them unlearn what they've learned through harsh lessons, like having the brown eyes and the blue eyes, fight with each other, because those are other things that you have no choice over. You're born with brown eyes, you're born with blue eyes. You have no choices. Or you're born with brown hair, born with blonde hair. There's no choice in that either. But she uses her platform that she has created to explain this and reveal to people how bigotry and racism is unfair, and she does so in creative ways. That doesn't mean she's anti-white.
About how judging people solely by the basis of superficial characteristics is wrong.
All right, let's go back to where
experiment I mentioned earlier.
Let's go back.
So this social experiment was conducted in the 1960s by a woman named Jane Elliot. She since went on to kind of be really anti-white and woke in that regard. But the experiment was meant to teach children about how...
I'm sorry, when I saw this video, I've seen the Tuesday morning video before during National Brotherhood Week, and I can't stop thinking of Tom Lehrer's song, the National Brotherhood Week. Oh, the Protestants hate the Catholics, and the Catholics hate the Protestants, and the Hindus hate the Muslims, and everybody hates the Jews, but during National Brotherhood Week... All right, look it up. Tom Lehrer. If you don't know Tom Lehrer, listen to Tom Lehrer. Some of it is a little antiquated in that it deals with politics of an earlier time, earlier day, decades ago, but it's still rather funny. Whatever became of Hubert Humphrey, who became vice president, says, second fiddle is a hard part I know when they don't even give you a bow. Werner von Braun song is a good one. There's other ones that my dad didn't play me that I learned later in life, like Poisoning Pigeons in the Park and Masochism Tango. But Tom Lehrer is a genius, and part of the reason why Weird Al is who he is, and Tom Lehrer actually did something, and he basically put the lyrics and sheet music into the public domain, so therefore you can't play his recorded songs, but if I knew how to play the piano, I could sit here and play the piano and sing his songs, and it wouldn't violate copyright. Anyway, let's continue with this.
Judging people solely by the basis of superficial characteristics is wrong. And it's not just that it's immoral, it doesn't make any sense. You can't hold an individual accountable for things done by people who just look like them, because our behavior and traits are not determined by how we look. That's why racism is the belief that race is a determinant of human traits.
But when we're talking about racism, again, I'm going to repeat this again because it's important to repeat again. We're talking about systemic racism. When we're talking about power structures, we have to talk about power. It's not just about beliefs. Yes, individual racism is stupid. Hating somebody for being white is just as stupid as hating somebody for being black. But when it comes to systemic issues of systemic marginalization of whole groups as a whole, yeah, there's some other more nuanced things you have to discuss.
Note I didn't say anything about anybody needing to have any power over anyone
because you ignore that because that's important to look at, and you don't want to look at that part because it harms your argument.
Because they believe that. Because that's bullshit. But
it's not, because again, when people are talking about racism and doing the social justice work and trying to make sure that there's social justice, not individual justice, but social justice, you have to look at the social reasons. And the social reasons include dismantling white supremacist power structures.
Let's get into this video.
Yeah, Kimchi is like...
This is a special week. Does anybody know what it is? National Brotherhood Week. What's Brotherhood? Treat everyone as though he was your brother. And is there anyone in this United States that we do not treat as our brothers?
Yes.
Who?
The
black people. Who else?
Indians.
Absolutely the Indians. Many places in the United States. How are black people treated? How are Indians treated? How are people who are of a different color than we are treated?
They don't get anything in this world.
Why is that?
Because they're different color.
You think you know how that would feel to be judged by the color of your skin? I don't. Do you think you do? No, I don't think you'd know how that felt unless you had been through it, would you? It might be interesting to judge people today by the color of their eyes. Would you like to try this?
Yeah!
Sounds like fun, doesn't it? Since I'm the teacher and I have blue eyes, I think maybe the blue-eyed people should be on top the first day.
Now, notice what she's doing here. She's literally dividing them up into groups, which, as the study that I just cited showed, doing this in of itself will create discriminatory behavior. Let's continue.
I mean, the blue-eyed people are the better people in this room. Oh, yes, they are.
Yeah.
Blue-eyed people are smarter than brown-eyed people. This is a fact. The brown-eyed people do not get to use the drinking fountain. You'll have to use the paper cups. You brown-eyed people are not to play with the blue-eyed people on the playground. Well, the brown-eyed people in this room today are going to wear collars so that we can tell from a distance what color your eyes are. You ready, Laurie?
Brown-eyed.
She's a brown-eyed. You'll begin to notice today that we spend a great deal of time waiting for brown-eyed people. I don't see the yardstick, do you?
It's probably over there. Hey, Miss Knight, you better keep that on your desk when the brown-eyed people get out of hand.
Oh, you think if the brown-eyed people get out of hand, that would be the thing to use? Who goes first to lunch?
Blue-eyed.
The blue-eyed people. Blue-eyed people may go back for seconds. Brown-eyed people do not.
Brown-eyed.
Don't you know?
Oh, they're not smart.
Now notice again, she created these groups and specifically encouraged dialogue that one of these groups was better or, whatever than the other. Let's continue.
And it seemed like when we were down on the bottom, everything bad was happening to us.
The way they treated you, you felt like you didn't even want to try to do anything.
It seemed like Mrs. Elliot was taking our best friends away from us.
What happened at recess? Were two of you boys fighting?
Russell called me names and I hit him in the gut.
What did he call you?
Brown eyes. They always call us that. They keep calling us brown eyes.
What's wrong with being called brown-eyed?
It means that we're stupider.
I watched what had been marvelous, cooperative, wonderful, thoughtful children turn into nasty, vicious, discriminating little third graders in a space of 15 minutes. Yesterday, I told you that brown-eyed people aren't as good as blue-eyed people. That wasn't true. I lied to you yesterday. The truth is that brown-eyed people are better than blue-eyed people. Russell, where are your glasses?
I forgot them.
You forgot them. And what color are your eyes?
Blue.
Susan Ginder has brown eyes. She didn't forget her glasses. Yeah. Russell Ring has blue eyes, and what about his glasses?
He forgot them.
He forgot them. Yesterday we were visiting, and Greg said, boy, I like to hit my little sister as hard as I can. That's fun. What?
Lucifer the Doberman, I thought you being liberal meant you protect freedom of speech. It doesn't mean... Freedom of speech doesn't mean you get to use my platform to say everything you want. Freedom of speech is a prohibition against government preventing you from speaking. And if you're going to be abusive to people, and he started to seem to be, what I saw was getting to the point of being overly abusive, I had to shut it down. At least mute for a second. Just calm your whatevers.
What does that tell you about blue-eyed people?
So again, she's now assigning group identity based on these superficial, beliefs. In this case, the color of eyes. And this is important because this sort of thing is going on right now towards a certain demographic. And we'll get into that in a moment.
The brown-eyed people may take off their collars, and each of you may put your collar on a blue-eyed person. The brown-eyed people get 5 extra minutes of recess. You blue-eyed people are not allowed to be on the playground equipment. You blue-eyed people are not to play with the brown-eyed people. Brown-eyed people are better than blue-eyed people. They're smarter than blue-eyed people.
But see, this sort of thing isn't happening. Nobody's saying that black people are smarter than white people. It's not the thing that's happening with CRT. It's not the thing that... what people were saying was that white people are smarter than black people, and they're fighting back against that.
And if you don't believe it, look at Brian. I use Orton Gillingham Phonics. We use the card pack. The brown-eyed children were in the low class the first day, and it took them 5.5 minutes to get through the card pack. The second day, it took them 2.5 minutes. The only thing that had changed was the fact that now they were superior people. You went faster than I've ever had anyone go through the card pack. Why couldn't you get them yesterday?
We had those collars on.
You think the collars kept you?
We just keep thinking about those collars.
Oh, and you couldn't think as well with the collars on. 4 minutes and 18 seconds. How long did it take you yesterday?
3 minutes.
3 minutes. How long did it take you today?
4 minutes and 18 seconds.
What happened?
Went down.
What were you thinking of?
This.
I hate today.
How do you do? I hate too.
Because I'm blue-eyed.
See, I am too.
There's nothing, it's not funny, it's not fun, it's not pleasant. This is a filthy, nasty word called discrimination. We're treating people a certain way because they are different from the rest of us. Is that...
Now, this kind of comes back to, again, what they said. If you're assigning differences to people, then you're going to create this situation.
fair?
No.
Nothing fair about it. We didn't say this was going to be a fair day, did we?
No.
And it isn't. It's a horrid day. Okay, you ready? What did you people who are wearing blue collars now find out today?
I know what they felt like yesterday.
I did too. How did they feel yesterday?
Down. Like a dog on a leash. Yeah. Like you're chaining them up into prison. Like you're shut up and you're throwing the key away.
Should the color of some other person's eyes have anything to do with how you treat them?
No.
All right, then should the color of their skin?
No.
Should you judge people
No.
by the color of their skin?
No.
When you see a black man or an Indian or someone walking down the street, are you going to say, look at that silly looking thing?
No.
Does it make any difference whether their skin
this is a good thing that she's doing, so I don't know.
is black or white?
No.
Or yellow?
No.
Or red?
No.
Is that how you decide whether people are good or bad?
No.
Is that what makes people good or bad? No.
So this is where it divorces from the current activism, which is, you'll notice she'll say, or said, does the fact that someone's white mean anything? And they all said no. But that's not how things are done anymore. We don't tell people that it's okay to be white. And specifically, if somebody were to do something like say, post flyers around a college campus that say,
nobody's saying that these people should be ashamed of themselves for being white. They're trying to dismantle white power structures as a whole, and some white people are fragile and can't handle it.
Say it's okay to be white, it would be labeled as hate speech. I wish I was making that up. That actually happened. So hate crimes have been on the rise, as we discussed earlier. I discovered an interesting little tidbit. Who's in second place? That would be the victims of anti-white hate crime. So despite being supposedly a white supremacist society, white people come in a solid second place beneath black people when it comes to being victims of hate crime.
Okay, but let's look at this for example. Anti-black or African-American hate crimes, 3,915 compared to 1,082. And white is second place, sure. But what is that as a percentage of their group as a whole? How many black people are in this country? You know, there are 7 times more white people than black people in this country, yet there are almost 4 times as much hate crimes against black people than white people against the country. So, if you do that math, 7 times more white people, but there's 3 times what is that? If the math is correct, you're 21 times more likely to be a victim of a hate crime if you're a black person in this country than you're for a white person in this country. And if the math is wrong, tell me in the chat. If I messed something up there, let me know. But I think I got that right. Anti-Hispanic or Latino, what percentage of the American population? Let's see, percentage of American population by race. Let's just look at that. Population by white alone, see 55 more. So 76% white alone. This is slowly loading. Hispanic is 18%, so 18, 36, 72, so about 4.5 times more white people than Latino people. So even though there's just under double, just under half, or just over half of the people who were victims of anti-Hispanic, anti-Latino crimes, 693 versus 1082, there are still, 4 times more people who are white than are Hispanic in this country. As such, you're 2 times more likely to be a victim of a hate crime if you're Hispanic or Latino than if you're a white person. So even though the numbers put white people at number 2, the rates or the likelihood of being a victim of a hate crime, if you are in these groups, white people is not number 2. White people is at this point is number 3. Let's see, Asian alone is 5.9%. Anti-Asian is about a third, so 33% of 33% of is the number of anti-Asian crime versus anti-white. But there's 6% versus, let's see, so that's 10, 11, 12 times more white people than Asian people. So you're 4 times more likely to be a victim of anti-Asian hate crime if you're an Asian in this country as compared to a white person in this country. So that knocks white people down even further. So there you go. So while anti-white is number 2 when it comes to whole numbers, when it comes to as a percentage of the population, anti-white is not number 2. You are much less likely as a white person to be a victim of hate crimes than you are if you're a black person, if you're a Latino person, if you're an Asian person, etc. So there's that. That's one very important thing to talk about when we're talking about numbers.
More white people are targeted for hate crimes than Hispanics and Asians and other groups.
But still, again, less likely to be attacked for an anti-white crime than you are if you're Asian or if you're Hispanic, Latino, Latinx.
Interesting. Now let's look at the way that activism regards race now. And again, this could apply to any group. You could be talking about straight versus gay, trans versus cis, male versus female, anything. But we're using race for now. First of all, you tell one of the groups that they can't be racist. That no matter what they do, no matter what they say, they somehow cannot be racist. Then you tell the other group that they're inherently psychopathic, that they must be stopped, the very future of mankind depends on it, that they are bad for the environment, that they don't know how to cook and their food is bland.
Well, I have an entire Facebook group called What in the Unseasoned Name of Care Does This Call Cassidy? And we've seen a lot of examples of white folks not being able to cook properly. Not very, very unseasoned Americans. But, I mean, including that with the rest of the stuff is a little silly. But, I mean, there's also the situation that here's one person's, I mean, no black people can be racist. Again, if you're talking about individual acts of hatred based on race, yes, that's silly, but we're not talking about that. When we're talking about racist power structure in this country, you cannot be a marginalized person and be racist in the country if you are talking about the form of racism that social justice warriors are talking about. So again, I'm going to repeat that over and over and over again.
Male versus female, anything. But we're using race for now. First of all, you tell one of the groups that they can't be racist. That no matter what they do, no matter what they say, they somehow cannot be racist. Then you tell the other group that they're inherently psychopathic.
Okay, so this is one person.
They must be stopped.
One person saying that they're psychopathic. One person in an opinion piece saying that white men must be stopped. But I think again, one of the things is that, look at this article, white men must be stopped, the very future of mankind depends on it. For 500 years, they've exploited their fellow men and plundered the planet. It's time they rein themselves in. They're talking about the fact that, you have these, who's been in control for 500 years? White people have been in control, and they've been the ones doing the most harm. It doesn't mean that, sometimes a shocking point can be used to make a valid, but it's just like the whole, again, rent is theft. Rent is not really theft. I mean, some people are going to tell you that that's true, but the argument behind rent is theft is a bunch of valid arguments about how people who hoard properties make it so that people are less likely, artificially reduce the supply of available housing, therefore they artificially increase the price that you have to pay for said housing, so therefore it makes it harder for people who are lower incomes to afford housing. Doesn't mean that rent is really theft. It's just something that says to shock people to get their opinion. And sometimes maybe comments are a little bit too shocking, and maybe people should be a little bit less ridiculous with their titles, but it doesn't mean that,
the very future of mankind depends on it, that they are bad for the environment, that they don't know how to cook and their food is bland. That they are inherently...
Again, I'm not upset when people say white people don't know how to cook properly, even though I can cook properly, because it's not about me. Generalizations are not necessarily things that are going to be insulting to the individual if you know that you're not part of the problem, if you're fighting the problem.
Liars and have a lying problem, and that your children can't be friends with their children.
That's not what that headline says. That headline says, can my children be friends with white people? It questions whether or not somebody's children can be friends with white people. Did that article finish by saying the opinion at the end of the day, no, my children can't be friends with white people? Or did it come to a different opinion? That's part of my problems with your conclusions, V-Radio, is that you take something like this, a question, can my children be friends with white people, and then state it as, my kids can't be friends with white people. And maybe there's a good point made in this article. Maybe there isn't a good point made in this article. But you can't just show the article headline and be like, that's what it says, when it's not what it says.
And also, that people of that group should be excluded. That basically you should be allowed to segregate yourself from them. What kind of reactions do you think you would get out of that people? The people that you have decided are this other group.
Again, white people, most white people who are on the side of understanding and what, people who are fighting for social justice and are fighting against institutionalized racism understand why somebody who is oppressed might not want people who are seen as the oppressors to come into their spaces and dominate their spaces, because they have many times experienced the case where you are somebody who is a minority, that you have those white people taking over those spaces because sometimes they feel overly privileged in doing so, and sometimes they don't even realize that they're doing it. It doesn't mean that black people and white people should be segregated totally. It just means that sometimes there should be places where, like, black people can get together and talk about black issues without having white people interject their problems. Because if there was like a group of black people trying to interject the issues that they were having, and V Radio walks along and says, and then tries to explain why they're all wrong, that's going to explain why they probably want their safe spaces. It's like, I had a memory come up the other day. It was because there was the Wonder Woman movie, and there was a movie theater down here in New Orleans that was going to do a women's only viewing of the Wonder Woman movie, and men were having apoplectic fits over the idea that, well, why do they have to have their own version? Why do they have to have their own screening? And then all of a sudden, later in the thread, you start seeing all of these men talk about, oh, Wonder Woman has great boobs. Wonder Woman has a great ass. Wonder Woman is so hot. I would love to be tied up with that lasso, and completely sexualizing the whole thing and proving the point as to why some women might want to be in a movie theater to watch the Wonder Woman movie without having these horn dog men ruining it for them. If somebody's put up a sign, V Radio asks if black people are not allowed, that is what again? Black people are a marginalized group. If it was somebody who said whites only, white people are not marginalized. White people do not suffer from systemic racism and bigotry. White people are not put at real threat when black people are allowed into their spaces. That's the difference. White people are not oppressed. And many white people are oppressors. Many white people vote for oppressors. Many white people, if you vote for Republicans who, for example, think it's okay to gerrymander black people out of power and to draw black congressional representatives out of their districts and make it so they can't be reelected, or enact laws that make it so that they lose voting power overall, or make it less likely for them to be able to cast a valid vote because you have like exact match requirements that don't take into consideration the fact that maybe the DMV had a typo on their paperwork, and maybe the DMV has it wrong and not that, so therefore if you don't have you're missing the hyphen instead of a space, and that means you can't get a voter registration in Georgia because you haven't had their voting identification doesn't match your driver identification exactly. Or maybe you have like a different, maybe you have one has the zip code that's the extended zip code and one that doesn't. Because you don't follow the match exactly, those people have their applications to vote sat on the desk without being processed because, hey, we don't have any reason to allow you to get your right to vote enacted, despite the fact that the Civil Rights Act has basically said that the right to vote shall not be infringed based on race. And you can't be denied the right to vote because you're black. But these people are working very hard to try and keep black people from voting. And who votes for these people is a large chunk of white people, especially white men. White men, as I said in my stop, is the GOP coup series that has 4 videos right now so far. The GOP coup, not the Stop the Coup series, but the GOP coup series, that basically states that what the Republicans want is an electorate that's older and whiter and probably more male. So Captain Terp says gerrymandering is such shit fucker. Yes, I agree. Gerrymandering sucks. And I have a Stop the Coup project, stopthecoup.liberaldan.com, that is trying to fight that, but I haven't gotten any traction with that either. So I'm almost ready to give that up and work on something else because I haven't been able to get any traction with that. Despite a couple of well-made videos, I'd like to say. I worked really hard on them, but I haven't really gotten much traction, so it hasn't given me any incentive to continue working on those videos. Let's continue.
What if you tell them that they lack empathy? This is where we run into a problem.
So So white people lack empathy across the socioeconomic spectrum. Apparent empathy gap among white Americans shows up on questions of both race and economic study finds. So again, we're talking about white people probably are more likely to be less empathetic, or less likely to be empathetic. It doesn't mean that white people can't be empathetic. It's just there's an empathy gap amongst the people where people may have more empathy as measured. And again, I don't know where that's not found to be true. Like, I don't see a problem with the idea if you have a large section of white people who are showing to be not be empathetic because probably of issues pertaining to the fact that they're privileged and they don't feel a need to see the problems that other people deal with, probably because they haven't been exposed to the problems that other people deal with, because of the fact that you have white people who are in charge who don't want to teach children about things like Tulsa, who don't want to teach children things like redlining, who don't want to teach children things about how really black people have have a hard time in this country because they're afraid that the white kids will somehow feel guilty for what happened. They don't want to teach. They want to follow the 1776, because they want people to learn patriotic lessons like how great America is and how wonderful America is, how America does no wrong. Ignore the man behind the curtain. Ignore the slavery behind the plantation. Ignore the fact that there were cops involved in the Tulsa massacre. And ignore the part that, little airplanes bombed the Tulsa people. Ignore all of that fact. Why? Because, white makes right, according to those people. And they're going to whitewash history and make it. And if you question anything that America does, conservatives are the ones that say that Obama was trying to do an apologize for America tour, because apologizing to a conservative is a horrible thing to do. It's terrible to apologize if you are a conservative, to a conservative. When in reality, in my view at least, the ability to say that you're wrong and apologize for it is a show of strength, not one of weakness. But that's not what conservatism often shows or believes. Let's see. V-Radio, Liberal. So is it okay to say black people are likely to be criminals, quoting FBI crime statistics, then what? It's okay to look into the reasons as to why black people are more likely to be criminals. I mean, it's not okay to say, if this article said right here, new study, black people more likely to be convicted of crimes. That's not a racist statement, nor is it an untrue statement. Why? Because it's true. Now, we look into the reason. Does that mean that we should treat all black people as if they're criminals? No. It means that we should look into the reasons why black people are more likely to be convicted of crimes, and more than likely, as we've discussed before on Twitter, it's because of the fact that we have a system that disproportionately treats black people worse than white people, that two people equally stationed with the same records, the same backgrounds, the same everything else, the black person is going to, on average, get the worse punishment, the worse record, more, higher bail, more likely to even be like, if the cops thought that two people who were one person black, one person white, if they thought they committed a crime, the black person is more likely to be arrested for it. The white person is more likely to be put into diversion instead of having to go sit in trial and go to jail, go to prison. The black people is more likely to have a longer sentence, punished more harshly. The white person's probably able to plead out more quickly if both are guilty. Let's say both were guilty of the crime. The white person probably has a more likelihood of being able to plead out to get a lighter sentence or a less strict charge that's going to put less harm on them in the future. Let's continue. We've got 8 minutes left, and then we'll be done.
Because if you do this, as we've already demonstrated, you're going to get a negative reaction from the people in question. Those people, in turn, are going to have discriminatory thoughts against you. They're going to be defensive against you. They're going to be afraid of you. And they will be othered. You will be telling them that they're not part of the tribe.
And so here's the thing. I will play one more video of this. It's going to be one of my videos. It's going to be the start of one of my videos. And we're going to talk about, so when if you're a person, like a white male, like who my series on coming to terms with activism is, if you're that type of person and you hear something like, white fragility or male fragility, and your gut reaction is, oh my God, it's terrible. Maybe just, again, the problem is you. because you're allowing something that goes against your intuition. You're allowing something that goes against your, that hurts your feelings. You have that gut reaction of, oh my God, I can't believe they said that. That makes me so mad. And then what happens? But if you if you took the time and sit about it and think about it and wonder why that person would say such a thing, wonder why studies say such things, wonder why these articles say such things. If you took the time to understand it, you might be less likely to have a negative problem with it. It might be less likely to have that negative reaction, to feel othered. Why? Because you might show that you have more empathy.
So they, in turn, will respond in a negative tribalist fashion to you.
V-Radio says, I've never really refuted what I said here. I have. Because I've said that the fact that, again, going back to the initial idea of people have a button on their heads. These people who are predisposed to vote for authoritarians have a button on their heads. If you push that button, they're more likely to support a strong-arm person who is going to, circle the wagons and want to kick everyone else out or whatever. So the conclusion there that I'm seeing that you're making, and look, again, you can tell me if I'm wrong, but the conclusion that you're making is that it's the responsibility of the people who are social justice warriors to take into consideration the feelings of those people. Instead of the people, it's not the responsibility of the individuals who are reacting badly. It should be my responsibility to make sure that when someone pushes that button, that I don't act in a negative way. It's my responsibility to deal with my issues. It's not somebody else's responsibility to know whether or not I'm going to be somebody who's going to react poorly to criticism of my group as a whole. No, I have the responsibility to act right. I have the responsibility to be a reasonable and decent person. Look, I've talked about this before on my podcast. And I've talked about this before on my blog, and I'll bring it up again because it's something that I think is important. One of the reason that I talked about earlier with the one thing that made me agree that we live in a rape culture, it was the argument that a false accusation makes it more likely that people are going to not believe the next person going forward. And that's what made me believe that there's a rape culture. Why did that particular one do so much? Because when I was in high school, I was falsely accused of sexual assault. It was a false accusation. Short version of that story is this. Day one, boy meets girl, boy hangs out with girl. Things happen. Day two, after girl leaves, girl comes back. Asks for the guy's friend to leave the room so they can have more alone time together. Day three, girl calls the cops, said that boy sexually assaulted the person on day one. Day one. It's an important part of the story. So, if on day one I committed sexual assault, why did she then come back on day two? Story falls apart, clearly. So, story falls apart, and the police report that I read after the fact, when I finally got the police report stopped right before she would have told the police officer that she came back to see me the next day. Why would that be? Well, because probably at that point, the police officer said, wait, he sexually assaulted you and then you went back to see him the next day? That's bull. That is utter crap. So, why do I bring that up? Because that thing affected me for a very long time. It probably still affects me to this day. It had a very negative effect on me and my life. But once I heard that charges were not going to be filed and that I was in the clear, the first thing that I thought, after almost fainting out of joy that I wasn't going to be charged with a crime, the very first thing I thought, I remember where I was right next to my dining room table. I was about to walk back into my bedroom. I could see the hallway where I was standing. And the first thing that I thought was, I'm going to have to make sure that I don't treat other people like they're this person that lied about me. I have to make sure that when other people come forward and say that they were raped, that they were sexually assaulted, that I don't take my own personal experiences and push them on those other people, because those other people are not to blame for what this person did to me. And nobody told me this. Nobody said to me that I had to feel this way. I came up with this myself because I knew that it would be wrong for me to think that somebody else might be lying just because somebody lied about me. Why is that important here? Because I'm saying that if you are the type of person that is going to start blaming everybody just because of what one person does to you, that is a problem with you. That is not a problem with them. You have the responsibility to act right. It was the responsibility of me to act right. It was the responsibility of me to make sure that I didn't treat all other victims of rape as if they might be lying. And look, and in my case, the police did absolutely the right thing, shockingly enough. The police went to her. I mean, the only one thing that they maybe should have done is maybe they shouldn't have even told me about it. Maybe they should have investigated it first with her before even telling me about it, because if they wouldn't have told me about it, I wouldn't have had the problems that I had from afterwards. But other than telling me before doing their investigation, they believed her, they listened to her, they let her tell her story. This is in the 90s. They listened to her, they believed her because they came to my mom first and called my mom and said this is an accusation, so they put some veracity into it. Made us had to work what we're going to do next, would find an attorney, do all this other stuff, make sure I'm defended properly or whatever. Turns out we never had to deal with any of that. But they listened to her, they believed her, they allowed her to tell her story, and her story completely fell apart. So the police did exactly what they were supposed to do in that case. Now, I don't know if they did any sort of... I wasn't there to see if they asked her any of the stupid questions, like, did you enjoy it? But when she said, oh, I went back to see him the next day, oh, no, you were not sexually assaulted. But the point is that I could very well have said, well, I'm not going to believe anybody else now because I was lied about and everybody else is lying too. That's not what I did. Because I knew it would be wrong to do that. Because it was my responsibility to not act badly. So it is the responsibility of the people with those buttons on their heads who might have their buttons pressed by these social justice warriors. It's their responsibility to not act badly as well. It is not the fault that somebody says something that may push somebody else's button. It's the responsibility of the person with the button to make sure that their either button doesn't press, or that their button, if their button is pressed, that they act responsibly and reasonably. Now, maybe that's hard in this country because this country has shown that we don't take mental health seriously enough. It's hard to get a therapist. It's hard to get the mental health that people need, especially if you don't have insurance. And there are a lot of people who are between like the Medicaid and the insurance. They don't have insurance, and so they can't get the help that they need. So no, we don't take mental health seriously in this country. And maybe people who would be that way, who would be a threat to do something rash because they've had their buttons pushed, or just simply go all crazy right wing or crazy extremist, even if, as the radio says, it's not left wing or right wing. Left wing people can do this too, but not go all extremist just because somebody pushed that button. Maybe if you had better mental health in this country, people would be less likely to do that. But it's still not the fault of the button pusher. If I say something that happens to push your button, it's your responsibility to act right. It's not my responsibility to pander to you or to treat you with kid gloves, especially if you're a person like who's going to end up being a Nazi or a white supremacist or whatever. Here, the liberal Dan, this is why you will fail. This is why Daryl Davis is a competent racial activist and you're not. Again, the question I have about Daryl Davis, I'm impressed with Daryl Davis that he convinced 200 people to reject bigotry and racism and come into the light. But how many people was he able to do that for? What percentage of people was he able to do that for? 200 out of how many? How many did he sit down and talk to? How many did he fail? How many failures did he have? And if there's lots of failures and he still keeps going, more power to him. Good for him. But 200 out of all of the ones in this country is a drop in the bucket. And maybe he has a gift, and great. But sometimes people need a carrot, and sometimes people need a stick. And sometimes for people's safety, it's you got to realize sometimes you might default to the stick, even though the carrot may have worked. But if the carrot doesn't work, what happens to him if the carrot doesn't work? And he finds the wrong one. What then? I mean, he's putting his life into his own hands by going into these racist, white supremacist, Klan, neo-Nazi type groups. What happens if he fails that one time because somebody isn't convinced and somebody takes offense that this black person is trying to come in here and change his mind? Then you lose probably somebody who should be treasured in this country for doing amazing work. But if he fails, it's not his fault. If he fails, it's the fault of the racist people and the people who raised that racist people. Now, see, here's the thing. V Radio says, if the activism you were suggesting was working, we would not have a rise in racism. But again, you're blaming the activism for the rise in racism. But you haven't proven that. You've proven that activism that, might rile the people up. But again, it's still the responsibility of the person to act right. Still the responsibility of a person to not be racist. That they are is not the people who are marginalized fault for calling them out on their racism. It's not. But again, there's also the thing that you rejected out of hand. You completely rejected and you refused to even accept the possibility of the rise in racism, the rise of white supremacy, the rise of more hate crimes could very well have come with the fact that we have a president who pandered to them. 2016 to 2020, he was the guy, beginning of 2021, he was the guy that they loved. They loved Donald Trump. They felt emboldened with Donald Trump. You listen to some of the people. What's the guy's name? Lang. The last name is Lang. It's not Scott Lang because that's Ant-Man. But it was somebody with the last name of Lang who was one of the January 6th insurrectionists. He believed that Donald Trump would get him a pardon. He believed that Donald Trump had his back. That was wrong. Donald Trump didn't pardon him. And he then cursed out Donald Trump and was angry at Donald Trump for failing to protect him when he was doing what he believed Donald Trump wanted him to do. But a lot of those people who were there in that insurrection on January 6th were there because they believed that Donald Trump had their back, and they believed that they were there because Donald Trump called them to do those acts. Donald Trump and the people around him who were trying to continue their coup convinced them to do those actions. They felt safe in doing those actions. They felt emboldened in doing those actions. Any other Republican was president at that time, they would not have done that. But Donald Trump riled them up. Donald Trump said that it was going to be wild the days before. He said it was like, oh, check this out. This is going to be wild when they come out. He knew what was going to go on. he encouraged them. He emboldens, by saying there are good people on both sides, he emboldened those white supremacists, those neo-Nazis, those racists, those people shouting down the streets of Charlottesville, screaming, Jews will not replace us, cheering blood and soil. He made them feel that they could act on those wishes. That, the safety that one feels in coming out. That's why people wear hats that say make racists afraid again. Because racists used to be afraid to show themselves. They used to be afraid to act on their racism. But they now see people in charge who have their back. And not just Trump, but people who are politicians who have Trump's back. Like your Matt Gaetzes, your Marjorie Taylor Greenes, your Madison Cawthorns, who thankfully lost, but who, referred to Hitler as Führer. He called frickin' Hitler his Führer when he went to go visit Hitler's, vacation home or whatever. Gates, DeSantis, all these people who are pandering and doing what Trump wants them to do, are emboldening these racists, these bigots, these white supremacists. They're emboldened. All these people who scream about critical race theory, lying about what critical race theory is. When somebody's telling you the falsehood about what critical race, that's saying that second graders and third graders are learning critical race theory, you're lying to them. You're lying that they're learning critical race theory is something learned in college. It's not something that's learned in elementary school. And when you're trying to put the fear of critical race theory into these people's minds, they're going to then act on it. It's not the people who are wanting kids to learn real history that are causing these people to be angry, that are causing these people to be all riled up. It's the people who are lying about what critical race theory is, who's riling them up. It's the people who lie about what the memo from the Justice Department said, when the Justice Department wrote a memo saying that they should look into people who are threatening school board members, or if you're literally making threats against school board members, that the Justice Department should take a look at that, at all of those people making threats against school board members. But the Republicans, they did something different. They said, no, they're looking at all the parents at the school boards. They're not just looking at some. They're looking at all the parents going into these school board meetings and treating them all like they're potential terrorists. The talk show I listen to in the morning does it every single time. Every single time I call up to try and correct him about how he presents and how he describes that memo that the Justice Department made about these people, every single time I correct him about it, he then twists right back around and he says, well, you shouldn't investigate too many parents are being investigated. You were investigating, you shouldn't treat all parents as if they're criminals. They're not treating all parents as they're criminals, but the people who are in power in the conservative and the Republican Party are saying that they're treating them like they're criminals, and the people are believing them, so that's radicalizing them more. It's not the social justice warriors that are radicalizing them. It's the Republican politicians that are radicalizing them, that are lying to them, that are misleading them, that the boogeyman is coming for them and coming for their kids, and that these people are going to groom their kids. Meanwhile, you have the weird situation. Matt Gaetz will sit there and talk about how the Democrats are trying to groom your kids in Florida or whatever. So you can't teach gay people. Like when DeSantis passed the Don't Say Gay bill or whatever, because you don't want people talking about sexual orientation in schools. Meanwhile, Nestor has that weird relationship with Nestor. Because these Republicans and conservatives, when they're really, really vocal about things, that's usually when they're the most guilty. That's why David Vitter showed himself to be a hypocrite way back in the day. In 2007, when it was revealed that David Vitter had serious sins with hookers, he was making a point that anybody who served in public office who cheated on their wife should resign. Did he resign? Nope, he didn't. He didn't follow the rules that he set for himself. But he is a hypocrite, and he was often the hypocrite of the week when I had my radio show. But the point is that you have these conservatives, Republicans who are very loud. Larry Craig, very anti-homosexual person in Congress. What did he do? He had that toe tapping incident in the men's room. Lewd behavior with another guy in the restroom. Why? Because these hypocrite small government conservatives will need government to stop them from doing what they want to do. But now you have it's even worse, because now you have these conservatives who are just flat out lying about what these issues are, what these causes are. These Republicans lie about, voter fraud. The big lie about the election, that how it was somehow magically stolen. How all of these Republican Secretary of State somehow wanted Joe Biden to be president. Biden wins Arizona. Biden wins Georgia. Roethlisberger, whatever his name is, and Kemp didn't want Joe Biden to win. It's absurd. But because Trump failed to win the state, he failed. And then, as Hal Sparks says correctly, Trump's failure to win in Georgia and to blame the system probably caused Perdue and Loeffler to also lose as well, giving the Democrats the Senate. Because they've made the people feel as if, the system is not to be trusted. But they've also gone even worse, and they've radicalized these people, thinking that the Democrats are coming after your kids. They're trying to groom your kids and make them be gay or trans. The Democrats are coming to take away all of your guns, when nobody's saying confiscate all guns. They're just, a universal background check's not all guns. They're doing so much stuff to radicalize these people, and they're riling them all up. So no, it's not the social justice warriors. It's not the people who are calling out racism and Nazism and white supremacy who are to blame for the radicalization of the right. It's the people who are the politicians on the right who need the right to be radicalized, because they need the right to come out in large numbers, and they need the right to be angry and mad and do, like, supposedly there was a report that they want to have an army of conservative activists camping out at drop boxes and being poll watchers and challenging people coming to vote, because the only way that they could win is to intimidate the people on the other side, to make them not want to vote. So no, I reject the premise out of hand that it's the fault of a social justice warrior, that it's the fault of a woke individual for calling out Nazism, for calling out white supremacy, for calling out white privilege, for calling out all these issues that are real problems in our country. It's not our job to treat Nazis, neo-Nazis, white supremacists with kid gloves. It's the responsibility of people to not be bad people. And blaming people who are calling out racism and bigotry and calling them racist and bigots only serves to harm the problem even more, only serves to then perpetuate these feelings amongst those people and justifying their beliefs. This video basically just says these people are justified in their beliefs because the social justice warriors made you do it. It takes away all responsibility from the people who hold those beliefs. And frankly, you should be ashamed of the fact that you're doing that. Let's see what I've missed, because I ranted for a while. Let's see. Lifted and gifted. Did I vote for Biden or against Trump? Yes, I did both. You want to know something about my grandparents, my dad's parents, worked on Joe Biden's initial campaign. And unfortunately, they were not alive to see him become president of the United States. They probably would have seen him become president of the United States had not Bill Biden died, because he probably would have run in 2016, and he probably would have gotten the nomination, and he probably would have won. But he chose not to run, and that's why Hillary ran. Joe Biden could have beaten Trump in 2016. Joe Biden did beat Trump in 2020. But they would have loved in 2016 to have seen Joe Biden win, because they used to gush over Joe Biden, how much of a wonderful person he was, of a good man that Joe Biden was when they knew him, when they worked on his campaigns. And I teared up on Inauguration Day, January 20th, 2021, because I thought, and I remembered how much they gushed over him and how much of a good person they were. And I would have loved to be able to talk to him one day and just be able to ask, because I have a feeling that if I asked him about them, he would probably remember them. Because because that's the type of person that he was. So yes, I voted for Joe Biden, but I also voted against Donald Trump because defeating Donald Trump was the most important thing to do. But I did vote also for Biden. So if you read those scientific papers are studying exactly what you're talking about, and they stated the attack and what causes the effect. But again, they just because they said that the effect of what the social justice warrior does causes the person to have the reaction, again, just because that triggers the reaction, it doesn't justify the reaction. If you flip me off and you make me mad, it doesn't give me an excuse to hit you, for an example. However you make me mad, it doesn't mean that I am justified in whatever bad things that I feel that you're justifying bad behavior and putting the blame on those that pushed whatever button was pushed. And that's just it's irresponsible. I think it's irresponsible for you to do so. Let's see. He is Roger Stone. Let's see. Did this guy just repeat the both sides hoax? I don't know if what that both sides hoax would be. Again, my mouse is being stupid. I really need to reboot my computer every time I start, or maybe I just need a new laptop, which would suck. I'm literally proving you wrong. I'm literally proving you wrong. I'm showing you why you're wrong. Because you're not willing to see it. Those who are none.
This is effective.
None are so blind as those who refuse to see.
What modern activism about race and a lot of other issues is doing. It is dividing us into groups and making it clear that you're.
Let's be clear. Black people and white people were divided into groups when black people were brought to this country as slaves. Black people and white people have been divided into groups by white supremacists for centuries. 1619 Project, when black people arose to the country, arrived in the land that would eventually become the United States of America as slaves. And for centuries, or at least 2 centuries, were treated as if they were property. And then after they were freed from slavery, they were not freed from the bonds of oppression. The white power structure kept them marginalized and oppressed. They didn't even have the right to vote afterwards in many areas. So we were split up into groups well before the woke culture came around. The woke culture is trying to stop the problem. The woke culture is trying to deal with the problem and addressing the problem. It's like the people who, in that Mississippi case, where the person who's in charge of the school district in Mississippi is being let go. There was an interview about, one of the person was asked about it, and he was like, I don't think you should bring race into it. But race is completely involved with it. Race has everything to do with it. Everything to do with race. Because she was trying to deal with the inequities in the school system, between the black school having no resources and the white school having a lot of resources. And the white people wanted none of it. They fought it tooth and nail to the point where she was let go. You can't fight inequities in the system because the people who have power will stop you from doing so. And your solution is that we need to be nice to those racists. We need to be nice to them. We can't be mean to the mean people. We can't be mean to the racists. We have to be nice to them. Because how else are they going to find their way? No. Again, the responsibility on people to not be racist is on the racists. It's not the responsibility of people who are trying to end racism to treat people with kid gloves until they eventually come around. They've had enough time to come around. How much time do we give them? How much time do you suppose that we give them? How much time do you propose that we say, okay, let's treat them with kid gloves. Let's be nice. Let's be nice to them. No. Maybe those few who are still in power and still in control need to be just shunned for their horribleness. And it's ridiculous and absurd to say that it's the fault of the marginalized for wanting to not be marginalized. That's the fault of the oppressed to fight back against the oppression. Oh, maybe the Jews wouldn't have died in the Nazi camps because, if they were only nicer to the Nazis. Calling out the Nazis for their Nazism just made them act more Nazi. It's the fault of the Jews. That's what you sound like to me. That's exactly what you sound like to me. If only the Jews were nicer to the Nazis, they wouldn't have died in the camps. You think that's an argument ad absurdum? You think I'm being absurd with that? I'm sure you do. But that's how you sound. Again, analogies don't have to be perfect. As I said, with saying that you were probably close on your Klingons versus black nationalist argument. Again, you didn't prove that the black nationalist beliefs were the beliefs of the CRT movement. You didn't make that connection. But you were close, even though it wasn't perfect. You were close on the extremist Klingons are the black nationalists. You were close on that one. And I said, you were close enough to where, it can be a decent analogy. And I said that earlier in the video, or maybe in the other video before I lost the signal. But no, that's what you did. My analogy may not be perfect, but that's what you sound like to me. You sound like you're saying, if only the Jews were nicer to the Nazis, then the Jews wouldn't have died in the death camps. If only the black people who were fighting against racial oppression and social injustice were nicer to the folks who become radicalized right-wing crazies. They should have just treated them more nicely, and they wouldn't be racist. Give me a break. That's absurd. That's why I told you in Twitter that the conclusions that you reach, that I found some conclusions that you reach that are really absurd. Some other statements that you've made in other videos, I think you've made some good points. I think you've made a couple of points. I mean, even though we disagree ultimately on the Rittenhouse thing, I think you made some points in the Rittenhouse discussion that made it seem that made me reevaluate some of my points of view. So did JWD. But see, V-Radio, at this point you were repeating a strawman about 50 times because how many times have you repeated a falsehood? I've proven that I'm right. No, you haven't. Not at all.
Your group identity is the determining factor, like the value that you have as a person and what your role in society is. And it could get kind of funny because sometimes they start turning on each other, then you end up with stuff like this. LGBT student activist group says that gay men are not oppressed enough to deserve representation. Or this, the trouble with white women. Or perhaps, are Asians the next in line to be white? Then we have, straight black men are the white people of black people. Because, at this point...
Again, this is an issue of intersectionality, whereas if you're a straight black man, yes, you're black, so you have some areas where you're not privileged, but you also have areas where you are privileged because you're heterosexual. If you're a cisgender man, then you also have the privilege of being cisgender. So it's an issue of intersectionality that you're probably not ready to deal with. Most of the people who are probably opposed to the things that I've been saying right now are not ready to deal with intersectionality when it comes to privilege. Maybe it's an inartfully worded thing, or maybe maybe they're making a shocking point to make the point. But who wrote it? Very smart brothers. Very smart brothers, I think, are straight black men. So they're writing it about themselves, if I'm recalling them correctly.
You, I guess, can say that they have the eye color, the bad eye color, anytime you want. And then they start turning on each other. The effects of this are, once again, just further division of society. Nothing good comes from this. So if people have a button in their minds...
Dan, you should stop not being such a blowhard. I've been rational and civil I've been on the air or on YouTube now since 8 o'clock my time, which means I've 5.5 hours. I've been on here for 5.5 hours. And over the last half hour, I've become a little more animated than I was previously. So yeah, you can miss me with that.
Essentially triggers racist or tribalist thought, then why is our activism seemingly geared towards pushing that button? That's exactly what's going on with all of the anti-white.
And I would say that, perhaps these people's buttons get pushed by what they say, but I think these people probably have multiple buttons, and I think more of the buttons are being pushed by the conservatives who are riling them all up and taking advantage of who they are, and taking advantage of what they feel to try and get them to do bad things. And I think the problem here is that you're not open to any of that. You haven't proven your point, but you also aren't open to the other points either, to other possibilities that it's, you reject it out of hand, that you've seen no evidence that Donald Trump emboldened these folks. I mean, did you even look? Or were you so concerned or convinced that you wanted to make this argument about woke culture, about these social justice warriors, about how it's all the social justice warriors' fault that these people become racist crapheads, that you just didn't want to see any other evidence that would make that argument harder to make? Come on, stupid mouse.
Anti-straight, anti-male sentiment. The only thing that's coming out the other side of that is more.
I mean, you said I didn't do anything scientific. I did show you a graph showing that after Trump was elected, they went back up. I mean, there may be a little bit of correlation and not causation. And always make sure not to confuse correlation and causation. But it started there. It started that year. The ticking back up started when Trump was elected. Because you want to ignore that.
Racism, sexism, etc.
Lifted and gifted. Does intersectionality impact white people? Yes. You could be a white person who's gay. You could be a white trans person. You could be a white immigrant. You could be poor. Poor white people have less privilege than rich white people. Because intersectionality also deals with issues of poverty. This is ultimately, I think, one of the problems that I think V-Radio fails to see, is that, about woke culture interfering with Occupy Wall Street. I mean, sometimes I think the people who only talk about income inequality and think the rest work itself out in the wash, which might be some problems with some of the people in the Occupy movement, where it's also a problem with some of the people in the Bernie Sanders movement, is that they only look at the income issues and income discrepancies, and they don't look at anything else. They don't want to see intersectionality. They don't want to see how, impoverished black people versus impoverished white people, and how there are still disparities between those two groups. Like, you might be a poor white person in a trailer park and you might have difficulties making your way through life, but you might still be able to yell at a cop on a traffic stop. Again, you have to look at all of those issues when dealing with issues of privilege, and I think a lot of people are not ready for intersectionality arguments yet.
Etc. Somebody wants us divided. Who's they is usually what you would be asked. Some of you might remember a video I did earlier. The first time I saw woke ideology weaponized for the purposes of dividing and conquering the people was at Occupy. We started off as an extremely diverse and unified group of people of different races, colors, creeds, etc. We were completely unified and everybody had an equal voice. As things progressed, that changed. There was a moment in particular when all of a sudden everything shifted away from discussing the struggle between the poor versus the wealthy.
Am I psychic? I don't know. I didn't see this part of this video.
And instead to discussing the struggle between white people and black people, straight people and gay people, etc. And I watched as Occupy disintegrated. It also was one of the things that prevented Occupy from working with the Tea.
But why did Occupy disintegrate? Is it because you have people wanting to talk about these intersectional issues? Or is it because you had people who didn't want to talk about these intersectional issues and didn't want to address those issues and only wanted to address rich versus poor? That's one thing that you're failing to look at.
Tea Party, which was something that was about to happen.
Why would Occupy work the Tea Party? The Tea Party were going to be apologists for the corporatists.
I remember Ron Paul distinctly calling for exactly that. Hey, Tea Party, let's work with Occupy because we have common enemies. The enemies in question were the big bankers at the time. So who is they? Well, they are the same people who are not friends to middle-class, hardworking Republicans, and they're also not friends to the poor left.
Not friends to middle-class working Republicans. Why are they not friends to is it because they're pissing off the middle-class white Republicans or whatever? Or is it because those Republicans have been convinced to not support the other side?
They are the real force behind
the Tea Party was not pro-corporations. I don't know what Tea Party movements you went to or you saw. The Tea Party movements that I saw down here in Louisiana were all about supporting the big business type folks. Get out of the way of business. Let business do their thing. They weren't about protecting the little guy. They were about protecting the status quo. They wanted to protect those interests, like the Koch brothers. Tea Party was all about the Koch brothers. They loved the Koch brothers in the Tea Party down here. Maybe the Tea Party by you didn't love the Koch brothers, but the Tea Party by me sure did. They loved them.
What goes on this earth? The real power. The men behind the curtain, so to speak. Somebody wants us divided to ensure that we're not a threat to them. The social justice movement and our activism is literally geared towards creating more division, more hatred, more distrust. And the goal of that is to prevent us from working together to overcome them. So, what...
I noticed there in that little chart that he also had the part about Black Lives Matter activists disrupt Bernie Sanders' speech. When the time when Bernie Sanders passed the mic and allowed the Black Lives Matter people have the say at his conference. Now, here's the thing. Here's one of the issues that I've had with Bernie. I've liked Bernie. I like Bernie Sanders since Bernie Sanders had a 4% approval rating. I like Bernie Sanders since before it was cool. I was a Bernie hipster. I would share things on my Facebook wall from Bernie Sanders that Bernie Sanders did, and guess what? People didn't know who he was. I did. I liked him. He had a lot of good things to say. What Bernie Sanders failed to do was take his message and address it to everyone when it comes to the different issues that they might have, by only looking at poor versus rich, by only looking at that level, and by failing to be intersectional, by failing to address how his changes would not only raise all ships, but get rid of the inequalities that existed. Because if a rising tide raises all ships equally, you still have inequities. You still have inequalities that exist. So Bernie Sanders did not take the opportunity that he had to explain to black supporters, especially in the South, how his plans would not only help raise all ships, how his plans would help to eliminate the disenfranchisement, would help eliminate the disparities between racial disparities in wealth building, the racial disparities that exist in our society. No, it was just addressing the economic versions. I think he maybe felt that he didn't have to explain that, but he had to explain that. Because again, he started off the 2016 election with only 4% name recognition. He needed to do something to explain why his way was going to be an improvement to black primary voters. He failed to do so. Not only did he fail to do so, when he explained why he didn't come down and campaign in the South as much as he did, he wrote off the South, the people living in the South, the Democrats living in the South, as conservative Democrats. He wrote them off as conservatives, i.e. that conservatives couldn't embrace his message, wouldn't believe in his message. But while there may be some social conservatism that exists in some of the black voters down here in the South, A lot of black voters in the South would have supported him had he just gone beyond the income inequalities and went down and did a deeper dive and said, well, how not just is going to deal with income inequalities between poor and rich, but how it's going to eliminate the racial gaps in wealth building, the racial gaps in trying to earn an income, and the racial gaps in, living in life. He failed to do that. He wrote off the voters in the South. They all swarmed to Hillary and gave Hillary Clinton an insurmountable lead that he could not overcome. And then when he insulted them by calling them conservatives, he probably wrote them off for the next year as well. And he made the same mistakes, even if they weren't written off, even if they were reachable. He didn't spend those next 4 years working to help build bridges within that movement that some of which got insulted by him, by his words, when he called them conservatives. He could have spent the next 4 years bridging that gap. He didn't do so. He made the same mistake again. Barack Obama wrote the book on how to beat Hillary Clinton in a primary in 2008. Hillary Clinton was almost the presumptive nominee at the start of the 2008 campaign. She was almost the presumptive nominee. She had lots of those people who were those, not the pledge delegates, but the other delegates, the special delegates or whatever, the ones that the Sanders movement hated. She had a lot of those in 2008 lined up already. But guess what happened? Barack Obama started campaigning smartly. Barack Obama started campaigning in the South. He started getting those delegate wins. He started getting those wins in Louisiana and South Carolina and North Carolina state. And I didn't see it back then. I didn't understand it back then. I criticized him for campaigning in states that he won't win in the fall. But he was a smarter politician than I was. He was smarter than me. He knew. And he had people behind him that knew that if he went and scooped up all those southern states and took them away, that he would be able to compete against Hillary Clinton in the places where she knew she was already strong. And as he was convincing the pledge delegate, he was amassing pledge delegates, those super delegates switched and moved away from Hillary and started joining Obama's camp. Why? Because many of the super delegates are elected officials who saw, well, if my state's voting for Obama, I have to vote for Obama too, or else they're not going to vote for me next time. So Barack Obama wrote the book on how to beat Hillary Clinton in the primary. Did Bernie Sanders read that book? Nope. He threw it in the trash. He didn't use that book. He ignored it. Hillary Clinton learned from her mistakes, and she campaigned in the South, and she got a bunch of delegates in the South, and she built an insurmountable lead. Had Bernie Sanders only done that, only reached out to black voters in the South, he didn't even have to win the southern states. Maybe if it had been like a 55-45 split, instead of him only getting like 20% in southern states. Sometimes not even getting 15% in some districts, meaning that he wouldn't get a proportional share in those districts. Because that's how it works with the proportionality. In the Republican primaries, you can make a big comeback by winning a state because it's all or nothing in many of the states. But in the Democratic primaries, it's proportional. So if you don't do what you need to do to get the proportion of the votes, if you write off 11 states of the 50 states, you're never going to win. It was a failed campaign from the start. But V-Radio wants to blame Black Lives Matter because they wanted to address the issues of racial inequality and not just income inequality. And there are issues of racial inequality that have nothing to do with economic justice. There are issues of economic. If you solve the economic problems, you deal with a lot of the problems of racial injustice, but not all of them. You're not necessarily going to automatically make policing safer. You're not going to make the other parts. You're not going to immediately, eliminate redlining or other issues that might be happening with black folks in financial sectors. You're not going to magically build the wealth that they didn't get to build for the last some odd, 200-300 years. You're not going to help. That's not going to help them build their wealth, and catch up. You have to explain how it's going to help them. There are other issues like LGBTQA. They're just, fixing income inequality doesn't end discrimination based on homosexuality or transgenderism. So you can't just ignore those other parts. And if you're in a movement, a social justice movement, like Occupy, and you're only focusing on this one thing, yeah, you're going to have other people be like, our issues are important too. Are the issues that of the people who are advocating for economic justice are going to be like, these issues of economic justice are important, but also are these other issues, like equality, gay marriage, like racial injustice, policing issues. And if the people in the Occupy movement were opposed to looking at those issues, and if V Radio says that the bringing up of these other issues is what tore the movement down, that tells me, potentially at least, that the people who were, a chunk of the people who were part of the Occupy movement were not caring about those other issues and weren't willing to discuss those other issues or give those time. And yeah, you're going to fall apart if that's going to happen, if you're going to ignore the issues of other people. Again, politics is give and take, especially on the left. If you're on the left, the right wing is very fall in line. We're in the right wing, we're going to fall in line. We're in the right wing, I had somebody tell me one time when I was running for office, I asked them for their vote, and they said, and I knew them, I worked with them, they said, I can't vote for you, I have to vote for who the Republican Party tells me to vote for. This is an otherwise intelligent person. And I was like, what? What are you talking about? That's ridiculous. But guess what? The Republican Party, the people are more likely to fall in line. And the left, it's like herding cats. You have lots of other interests that you have to deal with. And if you're an Occupy, and if you're an economic leftist, and you believe in those economic issues like Occupy Wall Street did, but you're unwilling to deal with the people on those other issues, then yeah, your movement's gonna fall apart. Because if you're on the left, you have to work with other people with other interests. You have to work to lift everybody else up. It's like herding cats. Let's see. Boom. V Radio, Hillary is not electable. I mean, she was electable. She got more votes. She got 3 million more votes than Donald Trump. Now, it wasn't in the right places. Another one of the problems I have that I've discussed with the people who, when I was having an argument with the rabid 12%ers that I called them in my podcast, because they want to say, Bernie Sanders would have gotten more votes than Hillary. So? Doesn't matter if Bernie Sanders would have gotten more votes than Hillary. Where are those votes coming from? Are they coming from California and New York? That doesn't mean anything. She already won California and New York. Are they coming in states where maybe she gets like 5% more, but Trump won by 30? That doesn't help either. It only matters if he would have won in those states that matter. And yeah, there was a chunk of people in Michigan, Wisconsin, or Pennsylvania who did go from Bernie to Trump, and who could very well have made the difference. But there's actually evidence to show. I've talked to people who are like that those people who were voting for Bernie in the primary were never going to vote for Bernie in the general, because those people were always Trump supporters who always wanted Trump, and who thought that electing Bernie and hurting Hillary was better for Trump. So they were always going to vote for Trump and not for the Democratic nominee. So, there's the evidence isn't there that the increased the 7 percentage points that he had over Trump, over that more than Hillary Clinton did in the NBC poll that was from like the May 13th and 17th. The evidence doesn't exist that would have meant more state wins. And maybe he might have won Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. Maybe he would have won those states, but he could have lost others. Because again, it doesn't tell us. Maybe in gaining in those states, he loses in other states. No way to know. We're not in Earth 2. We can't tell that. But they all insist that, he was more electable. Hillary should have resigned, should have dropped out of the race despite having the lead, despite having the pledge delegate lead. My sons tell me that I'm liberally, conservatively, cautiously optimistic. It's funny.
And the goal of that is to prevent us from working together to overcome them. So, what does this mean for you? If you're engaged in this kind of activism and you believe that you're ending racism or fighting it or doing anything...
Right, if we let class dividers and race baiters win, there will be no America. I thought Occupy was about class dividers. They were about opposing the 1%. Isn't that a class division right there?
To prevent racism from continuing to grow, you need to take a look at yourself and what you've been doing and realize that you've actually been accomplishing the opposite.
Yeah, don't be a race baiter. Don't talk about race. Just ignore race and it'll go away. Be an ostrich. Put your head, bury your head in the sand.
We went from racism being on a decline to racism growing. But
again, and I'll remind you again, we saw two different figures. We saw percentages of, and this is why I say you didn't prove your point in V-Radio. We went from percentages of racism. So the percentage of racism went down, but the number of attacks went up. That's not contradictory. That's not contradictory because number of attacks, the people who are left who are not racist might see themselves as being smaller and smaller minority, and that might get them more and more radicalized, which might make them do more things. But I think you're messing up some causal effects there. The fact that it's not that it's them being racist that are ultimately the problem, and them being radicalized isn't the fault of people calling them out on their racism. Yes, let's just be nice to racism, and they won't be racist anymore. No, that doesn't work. That doesn't fly with me. I'm not lying, V-Radio. I'm not lying whatsoever. I mean, I'm sure I can go to your video, and I'll watch your video and see where exactly you believe that I'm lying, but you haven't addressed it in this chat as to what I've specifically lied about, and I've addressed those areas that you said that I lie about. I haven't. It's not a lie. You haven't proved your point.
But it's not just the race issue, as I mentioned earlier. As an excellent trans activist who recently came forward and did a video detailing the trans activist state of affairs, pointed out that a lot of the things that trans activists are doing will lead to more transphobia. The same thing is true of the extreme feminists.
Which trans activist said that? Please don't tell me it was Blair White. Please don't say it was Blair White. Was it Blair White?
Who seem to be doing a fantastic job of fostering and...
Okay, you're saying this. The science shows that if you attack people, they won't change their minds. But the science isn't proving that it's causing them to be racist. They're already racist. The responsibility on people to not be racist is on the racists. And the people that are riling them up, like the Donald Trumps and the people who are, the big lie about the election and they're going after the parents, they're riling the racists. They're riling the extremists up. Attacking racism didn't cause the shooter to go shoot up Buffalo, the supermarket in Buffalo. That's not the fault of a social justice warrior. That's the fault of a Tucker Carlson for promoting replacement theory on his show. It's the fault of other conservatives who are spouting that garbage. And that's not me lying. That's me putting the blame where it belongs. Just be nicer to racists and they'll behave. No.
Essentially creating an environment rich for sexism to take hold, and just across the board.
There's no evidence of what? There's no evidence that the Buffalo shooter followed the replacement theory and that he was that he listened and watched Tucker Carlson, who also talks about replacement theory. I think there is evidence of that.
This strategy of inquisitions and witch hunts and gotta get you is literally not accomplishing anything.
Wait, so the guy had the victims of the Waukesha massacre on his gun. So the person who ran over the people at the parade is to blame for if he wouldn't have run over the people at the parade, this guy would have gone to killed black people. No, the bad actions of one person who murdered people doesn't justify the bad actions of the other. Yeah, he may have had the victims of Waukesha on his gun. He also quoted Tucker. There's evidence also shows that he listened to Tucker Carlson. That he listened and he spouted that white replacement theory or whatever crap.
You might get people to be quiet when you're around, but that doesn't mean you've convinced them of anything. That means that they've decided they don't want to talk to you anymore. And at that point, you've failed. Activism is not supposed to be about making people afraid. Activism is supposed to be about convincing people that you're right, that your issue has merit, and that people should follow it. That people.
But I bet you don't say that to the right wing, who also uses fear.
People should endorse it. People should work with you. If your goal is just to go out there and, sow hate and dissension, are you really working at that point towards ending bigotry and racism or whatever? Obviously not. You may not think that your goal is to go out and sow dissension, but as I've already demonstrated, social science has shown for a long time that if you go and attack somebody's group, you are inevitably going to make them defensive, they're going to stop listening to you, and the men behind the curtain, that's exactly what they want. They want us to be unable to listen and communicate with each other. Because as long as we're focused on each other, we're not paying any attention to them and whatever their agenda is for us. This is not about white supremacy or black supremacy.
Of course it's about white supremacy. Come on. It's ridiculous.
In the end, it's about the supremacy of the super fantastic.
V-Radio, I convince people on the right all the time. I have convinced people on the right, yes. I have made logical opinions. I don't start off by attacking people. I don't. But I mean, at the end, I might if it becomes real. But I'm not going to start off. You're sitting here. You're telling me, oh, you have to be nice to the people, otherwise they're going to be back badly. No, that's apologia for bad behavior. If I'm speaking out about racism, about racists, if I'm playing the race card, so to speak, if I'm a race baiter, and I'm talking about racial inequities in this country, I talk about white privilege. If I talk about white privilege and people don't understand and I've tried very hard. I'll try very hard to explain what white privilege is and why white privilege is not what a lot of people think it is. And I'll give them that time. I'll spend that time and effort to explain what privilege is versus what it isn't. That privilege is about, general averages and not about individual success or failure. But some people are so cold-hearted, hard-hearted, that they don't want to listen to it. They don't want to believe it. They don't want to listen at all. It's not my responsibility to be nice to those people. If only I played nicer, they would be nicer back to me. No. They say you catch more flies with honey than you do with vinegar. You catch the most flies with crap. Doesn't mean you're doing a good job. And I think that's a lot of those flies that are flying around and buzzing around and wanting to, and doing those bad actions are being attracted by the crap that is those people riling them up. Those people, yeah, you have a point that there are people who are in power who don't want to see more people working together. But you're blaming the wrong people. It's the people who are riling them up who are causing them to not want to listen to the people making the rational arguments and the reasonable arguments. And when that doesn't happen, then those people making those rational, reasonable arguments are then going to get frustrated and angry. I think you're putting the cart before the horse here. I think you've come to a lot of bad conclusions here. Lots of bad conclusions.
Sickly wealthy over the rest of us. Thanks for listening, folks.
Okay, so that's the end of that. And I said I'm going to go over... Let me go to my videos real quickly. Your channel. Playlists. Where's Coming to Terms? Hypocrite of the Week, Biden Harris, GOP coup, reactions. Coming to Terms with Activism. We'll watch this for a second, and then we'll leave. About 3 years ago, I started making a video series called Coming to Terms with Activism.
I got 2 videos in, but was very frustrated with my video equipment at the time, and I was not happy with how it was looking, so I stopped working on the videos. I've since improved my situation and my setup, and I want to continue, and I'm going to redo the first set of videos before going on to other ones. So without further ado, here are my videos
have better backgrounds now.
Coming to terms with activism. Right, this series is about literal terms, like things that people hear when they're talking about activism, or people might, be listening while other people are talking about activism, and they might hear something, that just doesn't sound right to them. And this series of videos is catering more towards, people who are privileged. The ultimate example of this might be a cisgender straight white guy. And we'll explain, all of that. If any of you don't understand what all of that meant, we'll get to that later in the series as well. But if you want to be a good ally, but maybe you find yourself flinching at some of the terms that are said, that's why I'm making these video series. You might hear things that maybe it gives you a bad gut reaction, and maybe you start fighting over word choice, over trying to listen and be supportive of what's being said. Look, I've been there. I've heard terms in the past that I didn't get, and I was like, that's just ridiculous. Why are they saying these things? Or maybe you've heard yourself saying, well, why are they saying that? It just harms the movement, or something like that. It just doesn't sound right. It's going to drive people away. And that really doesn't help
come on.
Because there are reasons why these people are using the terms that...
literally. When did I make this video? I made this video well before. Sometime during the pandemic, because I had the beard, but it was early in the pandemic because my hair was still short. So this is probably sometime in early 2020 where I made this video. And I called what V-Radio said way back then. I called my shot. Let's continue.
That they use. And this intro video is specifically meant to help you understand how you should react in those situations in general. When you find yourself hearing something and having that gut reaction where it's just like, that's just insane, I don't understand that, why are they talking like that? And I'm going to explain how I've learned to deal with these things when I hear things that are contrary to my worldview and that I don't understand. And, instead of banging it out on my keyboard, try and explain my gut reaction and why I think this isn't making sense. What I like to do in these situations is just take a step back. Go away from the conversation. If you're on Facebook, maybe put notifications on the thread, and don't even make a response to the thread. Just put notifications on so that you...
As I was saying, you don't want to, don't allow yourself to have that big gut reaction. Just let it marinate. Just don't immediately react. Don't get all angry because somebody said something you disagree with.
You can have it there, and you can know where you can go back to later on in the day once you've taken your step back. And think about things a little bit. Do research about the terms that are being said. Find out the context in which they are given. Think about why the people are saying the things that they are saying. Try to think of the things from the other person's point of view, because their life experiences might be much different than yours. And so if you try and put yourself in their shoes, it's very hard to do so when you have layers of privilege and you don't necessarily understand what certain things might be that you're hearing. But just try to have a little bit of empathy for them and try to understand where they're coming from. And the simple act of having empathy for others will do you a lot of good when you're trying to be an ally. And I'm not saying in this video series that you have to agree with everything that every activist says at the end of the day. You still may disagree, and that's fine. We don't have to agree on 100% of everything to be good advocates for social change. But even if you don't agree, maybe just taking the time to take a step back and to figure out why it is that the people are saying these things that are giving you that bad gut reaction, you might just get an understanding of where they're coming from and just maybe try and focus on those issues where you do agree, while trying to understand, okay, well, maybe I'm not going to make such a big deal about this because now at least I understand where it's coming from. In the coming days, weeks, and months, I'm going to be making more videos about the terms that I've heard or the terms that I've seen others have had bad reactions to, and even some where I have helped people get over that hump, where they hear something and they're like, well, that's ridiculous. And I've said, no, well, think about it this way. Take this other point of view and try to consider it this other way. And they were like, you have a good point. And they've came around on those issues. So please remember to like this video. Please subscribe to the channel if you like these series. I also have a Patreon, patreon.com/liberaldave.
All right, so that's the end of that one. I think the next one is the one I wanted to watch. Fragility. There you go. I think that's the one I really wanted to go over, because it kind of shows that gut reaction at first.
Hey, Liberal Dan here again. Welcome back to another episode of Coming to Terms with Activism. And today,
I've also learned that it's better to have a dark right above the camera, to have something dark instead of something light, so that it doesn't have such a bad reflection off my glasses. That's one of the things I've learned in doing this.
Today's word is fragility. When I first heard the term male fragility, I thought to myself, wait a second, what are they talking about? Male fragility? Just because I'm a man, it doesn't mean... And as quickly as I reacted to it, I realized that I myself must be fragile, because I heard this term and immediately started freaking out over it. And if I wasn't fragile, at least a little bit, I wouldn't be having that bad reaction to the term. So what does the word mean? What does the term mean? People who are privileged don't want to change their worldview, and something that challenges the status quo might cause them to push back because they're scared of the change and how it will affect them. And if you're thinking to yourself and having that gut reaction to the word privilege, thinking to yourself, where's my privilege? Just hold that thought, because that video is coming soon. So these people are worried about the harm that might come to them, supposedly, by the changes around them. And the reaction to that potential harm exposes that fragility. Male fragility is also how someone gets when they are challenged on their so-called manhood. Pick apart one small part of what that man believes, especially about manliness or whatever, and they shatter, often with harmful results. Fragile men will often take every comment that's generally made about men and think it applies to them. Or they might get upset because they know it legitimately applies to them and they don't like being called out on it, because introspection is not seen as a manly trait. They don't want to confront these issues because they fear that their world will fall apart if they are confronted. And most importantly, they fear being mocked for not being manly enough, because they don't want to be seen as weak. So instead of revealing some other emotion that they might have, they lash out in anger. So how do you deal with your fragility? First of all, don't allow yourself to get that gut reaction, because that just shows and proves that you're fragile. Second, use empathy. Try and figure out what is causing people to say that whatever maybe you're doing or some men in general around you are doing, try and figure out what those people are saying to say that this is an example of male fragility. And then also, finally, you want to try and figure out how to fix what it is that's making you so sensitive to those things. Maybe there's something in your past that you don't want to confront because it's something maybe bad that happened to you that you want to ignore, or maybe something that you did that you don't necessarily agree with, but you don't want to talk about it. You don't want to understand that maybe you did something wrong in the past and maybe you need to acknowledge that. Or maybe there was nothing wrong in the past or nothing harmful happened to you, but you just embrace this societal view that you have to be this big manly man and you can't let anything in or else it might fracture that shell. But by allowing that self-introspection, you are going to make yourself less fragile. And then maybe you can look at statements that are made about maybe men in general, and instead of saying, not all men, you might respond to somebody else who says, not all men, and you might say, you know what? A bunch of men, though. And ironically, by allowing yourself to become more vulnerable, you make yourself less fragile. By understanding that you can confront those issues directly, you present yourself as having more empathy and are more open to dismantling the power structures around you. This is a truly basic look at these things. Issues like toxic masculinity and the patriarchy also contribute and amplify male fragility, and these are also other topics that will be discussed in future videos. But in order to tackle those issues, you have to understand how society has promoted men to be so resistant to change that the mere suggestion of change makes them break down. Again, I want to thank you for watching this video. Please remember to subscribe to the channel and share the video if you liked what you've seen. Also, please remember to support the Patreon, patreon.com/liberaldan, and listen to the podcast and the minicast. All social media links can be found at liberaldan.com. Thank you very much and have a good day.
All right, so that is it. That is the fragility video that I was talking about, where, you know, I was kind of dealing with some of the issues, and apparently with my 2 videos that I made months ago, years ago now, that, you know, I was kind of prophetic in a lot of the things that we were discussing about today. So there you have it. That is the end. 6 hours. I've sitting here for 6 hours. I was not expecting to be here for 6 hours, but we had viewers, we had interactions, we had people on both sides of the aisle trying to, you know, have conversations. Apparently I'm a Marxist coward. Who knew? But, you know, it is what it is. I would say that on my if this was live over Blog Talk Radio, well, this has been over 3 hours ago if it was on Blog Talk Radio. But I would have played my. It is what it. I need to work on having a soundboard just on my desktop so that I can still play the same sounds that I play during the podcast when I'm simply just doing live streams. Thank you, Leslie, very much. Thank you, everybody, for joining us with this. It was fun. The next one I don't think is going to be as long. Hopefully it won't be as long, but we got a little sidetracked with a couple of the issues, so it happens every once in a while. I think still the quote of the night has to be Aaron with the location of the button. That gave me a good chuckle. I have, you know, my mind goes there sometimes too. So, but I appreciate the humor that is interjected amongst the chat. And I thank everybody again for joining it. And if you still haven't, I'm sure everybody here liked the video still, but if you haven't liked it, really like it. If you haven't subscribed, subscribe. Support the Patreon. And if you like any of the videos that you see on Liberal Dan, you know, here, Liberal Dan Radio here on Twitter, just, you know, watch some, share them. So if you think they make a good point, just share them out and say, hey, give this guy a watch, give him a listen, and subscribe. If anybody you know is liberal, leftist, progressive minded, or even if they're conservative and have an open mind, you know, again, I welcome all comers to listen to my podcast, to call into my podcast, and to, you know, to join in the chat here and give their points if they agree or disagree, and I'm happy to have them. And I'm trying to make that stretch and trying to reach for that first 1,000. They always say the first 1,000 is the hardest, right? So trying to grind out to get those first 1,000, and I think if we do it by September, I think if we get there by September, I think at that point I'll also probably be at the point where I can request monetization. And I think that'll encourage me at that point to make more videos, because they'll have more incentives to make more videos, because I'll have more opportunities to make a little extra income doing them, and that'd be awesome. Anyway, thank you everybody who stayed with me this long. I mean, it's 2 o'clock here, my time. If you're in the East Coast, it's 3 your time. Thank you, Jolie. Thank you, Aaron West, for being here and being moderators for the entire thing. Y'all are great. So happy to have you. Happy to have the Liberal Dan Radio Patrons. I mentioned y'all earlier. I'm about to start another coughing fit again. Patreon.com/LiberalDan if you want to be a monthly supporter. The Buy Me a Coffee or Buy Me a Cider link is on liberaldan.com, or it's also been posted in the chat as well. So again, thank you all very much for being here. Have a good night. Get some good sleep. Thank you for supporting me and supporting the show. Have a great night. I should have a really outro, like you know, the like Hal does. I'll work on that. That's maybe the next thing, is to have the good outros like I have on the podcast, to be able to have some music as we're going away. But until now, at this point, it just has to be kind of a maybe I should find. Do I have the songs that I have on here? Let's see, radio show audio. No, it's not that. Let's go to this. Go to here. Audio. Of original shows. Raw audio, is it on there? No. Man. Gotta find that one. Show start. Full shows. It's not show end. Let's see. I'm just basically talking just now. Let me see if I can find it this way. Find a song. See more. I'm trying to see if I can find the one that I don't think any of these is the ones that I use, but let's see. Wish I had the link to the old video music or whatever. West Web, you have no power there. That stinks. Let's see. I'm trying to see if I can find this music. That'd be great if I can find it. My browser is not supported. What? I'm in Chrome. That's crazy. Maybe I have to update Chrome? I don't know. Or is it this? Let's see. Click over here. Is it that one? Try to see if is that the one. No, that's not it. Is it that? No. Not that one. Not that one. Maybe it's one of this one. Maybe it's on this one. No, it's not that one. 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 This one. Nope. Can't find the untested the band that I have to do the intro and the outros of Liberal Dan Radio is from a group called Untested Methods, who is a friend of mine, who is the music is available royalty free, you know, just open commons license or whatever. So there's a, but for some reason I can't find the initial audio that I used for the intros and the outros. It's not that. No. 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 Not this one either, I don't think. It would have to be that one. No. 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 This is so funny. No, no, no. No, no. No. I don't know where that sucks. He had another one. There was another album that was out there, and it was, you know, better and had all the other stuff. Anyway, since I can't find the outro music that I wanted to play to leave the show, we're just going to do a cold exit, I guess. Again, thank y'all everybody for joining. Appreciate it. Just trying to find some fun, good music that I knew I could play for free that wouldn't be problematic with the YouTube censors or whatever. But anyway, again, y'all have a great night. Thank you so much. Peace.